Ranking determined a person's status and ignited desires for power, intelligence, connections, wealth, and employment. In that era, everything had a ranking, and so, the journey of one boy began. In a place called Torii Village, a boy was busily chopping wood with an axe. He appeared deeply engrossed in the task, and after completing it, mentioned to himself that his work was finally done. His name was Lowe, a young boy. Just as he finished cutting the wood, an elderly woman called out to him from behind and asked him to help her with her feet next time. Lowe responded with a quick agreement. Suddenly, a girl came running from behind, rushed toward the grandmother, and gave her a light push, expressing her frustration. She exclaimed that the old woman should stop asking Lowe to do everything for her. The girl's name was Yuna, a 16-year-old with a fiery spirit. The grandmother tried to justify herself, saying that Lowe was always standing idly zoning out. Yuna defended him, saying it wasn't like that, and explained that he had simply been born with a spaced-out personality. She then approached Lowe, grabbed his collar, gave him a shake, and pointed out that everyone treated him like a convenient tool because he always agreed to help them. Lowe replied that he honestly didn't mind. Yuna, clearly frustrated, shouted that he was missing the point. She admitted that she knew he was kind and good-hearted, but then leaned in and whispered in his ear, asking if he wanted to leave the village. She added that she had discovered a hidden path no one else knew about. The grandmother, overhearing the conversation, shouted in protest, reminding them of the village rule that strictly prohibited going outside. She pointed her stick at Yuna and demanded an explanation. Yuna questioned why they were never allowed to leave. The grandmother firmly replied that her answer was no. Then, the grandfather ordered 2 men nearby to lock Yuna up for a while. The men obeyed, grabbing Yuna as she resisted and shouted that the situation was ridiculous and unfair. Lowe and another elder stood nearby, observing the scene. The man then asked Lowe to help him draw some water. Lowe responded quickly and affirmatively. The man noted that Lowe and Yuna were the only ones around the same age in the village, yet they were complete opposites. Meanwhile, Yuna, still being taken away, cried out that she didn't want them to grow apart. The man turned to Lowe and told him that it was okay to take a break sometimes, reminding him that he must have things he wanted to do too. Lowe looked confused and denied it, insisting he would help. As he walked away to fetch water, memories from his past filled his mind. How he had lost his parents at an early age and had been left all alone. Yet, the villagers had embraced him like family. He reflected that he was aware of their kindness, and because of that, he wanted to repay them. Returning to the present, he affirmed his desire to help everyone, expressing that he truly loved the village and the people in it. Hearing this, the man became emotional and, with tears of joy, asked Lowe if he wanted to live with them starting that day. Lowe politely declined, explaining that he still had the house his parents had left behind. In his heart, Lowe believed the village mattered more than anything else, and the outside world meant little to him. Meanwhile, Yuna, now locked inside a cage, yelled at the grandmother, demanding to be let out. The grandfather sighed in exasperation, remarking that she should at least try to take after Lowe. Yuna continued to shout, questioning why they were never allowed to leave the village. The grandfather attempted to justify their rules by saying they occasionally invited merchants into the village, implying that there wasn't much they were missing. But Yuna countered passionately, pointing out that the outside world was vast, and she couldn't understand why they were always confined. The grandmother eventually responded that it was because they were a people who were resented. Confused, Yuna asked who resented them. The grandmother gave no direct answer, saying only that she didn't need to know, and that time would sort everything out eventually. Later, Lowe was seen finishing his task of drawing water for the man. Looking exhausted, he turned around and noticed Yuna hiding behind a large rock. She signaled for him to stay quiet by placing a finger to her lips. She motioned for him to come closer, and when he did, he asked her if she had escaped again. Yuna chuckled, saying that after getting caught so many times, escaping had become easy. Lowe remarked that it wasn't something to be proud of. Yuna brushed it off and urged him to come with her. Though confused, he followed. She led him to a small cave near the forest. Lowe expressed concern that if they went outside again, the grandmother would be furious. Yuna reassured him that it would be fine since it was only for a short while, insisting that she had something to show him. They began walking through the cave. She pointed ahead and told him that what she wanted to show him was right there. As they approached, they found themselves facing a breathtaking view of a beautiful valley and a flowing river. Lowe stood in awe, astonished and excited by the incredible sight. He expressed how amazing it all felt. Yuna, observing his reaction, pulled out a book and asked if he knew the rules of the outside world. Still overwhelmed, he asked what she meant. She began reading from the book, explaining that, according to it, which she had secretly obtained from a merchant, the outside world operated on a system called ranking. Adventurers, couriers, doctors, and musicians were all ranked. Weapons, food, strength, and wealth were also ranked, and everyone appeared to be in constant competition. Lowe was amazed to learn that the outside world had its own set of rules. Yuna confirmed it, adding that unlike the village rules, the rules of the outside world actually sounded fun. Energized by the idea, Lowe declared that he wanted to become a ranked adventurer. someone who could travel the world, compete with rivals and one day become cool and respected. Still, he hesitated and pointed out that they were not allowed to leave the village. But Yuna dismissed the restriction, telling him that she had already made up her mind. She invited him to come along, urging him to join her on an adventure and insisting that he had to go out there someday. Yuna had looked at Lowe and reminded him softly whether he remembered the time when they were just 5 years old and a huge bird had attacked her, and he had saved her. She asked if he recalled that moment. Lowe seemed puzzled and asked her if that really happened. She nodded, insisting it did. She spoke of a green buzzing creature that went woong woong and said that from that moment she had known. Even though he often spaced out. When he truly put his heart into something, he became stronger than anyone else. She believed he would shine even brighter outside the village him once again to come with her and explore the world. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, but Lowe, still overwhelmed, simply thanked her. He confessed that he loved the village too much to leave it behind. Yuna's expression changed immediately. She became frustrated and called him stubborn. She snapped that she would leave on her own, telling him to stay stuck in the village forever if that's what he wanted. Without waiting for a reply, she turned away. Lowe, watching her walk off, warned her to be careful on her way back. As she disappeared from view, Lowe sat still, thinking to himself that he never imagined Yuna would truly leave the village. Her words about rankings and the outside world still echoed in his mind, unfamiliar and intriguing. Evening fell, and he remained seated, lost in thought, until eventually he muttered that he should head back. Just as he stood up to leave, something strange appeared in the sky. A bizarre object, resembling a UFO, hovered above, emitting a strange light. It began to descend toward him. Fear gripped him, and he instinctively closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the light had vanished. Trying to calm himself, he told himself it was nothing and began running back toward the village, shouting for Yuna, for the grandmother, and for the other villagers. But when he reached the village, he froze in disbelief. The entire area had been wiped out. Homes reduced to rubble, the land barren. There was no sign of anyone. His voice trembled as he called out, asking where everyone had gone. His mind spun with panic and sorrow. He remembered Yuna's words, that she would always be by his side, that he was never alone. He also recalled the villagers' kindness, the way they had embraced him after his parents died, telling him he was family. He dropped to his knees on the empty ground, tears streaming down his face as he mourned the sudden loss. The weight of regret crushed him as he whispered that he was too late again. Suddenly a man approached from the shadows and said gently that all he could do was watch. Coming closer, he looked at Lowe and confirmed that he was the only survivor from Tori village. Lowe, voice shaking, admitted that he was. The man nodded, acknowledging how difficult it must be for him, but urged him not to worry, saying that the island was now gone forever. Lowe stared at him in confusion, asking what he meant by island, and demanded answers about the strange object in the sky. He begged to know what had happened to the village and its people. Overwhelmed with emotion, he grabbed the man by the collar, tears flowing, and shouted for an explanation. Instead of replying, the man handed him a piece of paper and told him to forget the village and head to the location marked on it. There, he said, Lowe would be able to live safely. But Lowe was still in shock, still desperate for the truth. He cried out again, asking for answers. The man finally lost his patience and shouted back that the entire village had vanished. He told Lowe that this was not something a child should be involved in and begged him to stop digging into it further. The past, he said, had to be left behind, or Lowe would only end up as another casualty. But Lowe stood firm. He clenched his fists and declared that he couldn't forget, not after everything. Yuna's words echoed once again in his heart. Even though you space out all the time, when you put your heart into it, you're stronger than anyone else. With resolve burning in his eyes, Lowe shouted that he would go to that island, whatever it was. And no matter what it took, he would bring everyone back. Lowe stood in silence, gazing at the ruins of the destroyed village, his mind overwhelmed by memories. He recalled how, when he was young, his parents had died in a landslide, leaving him completely alone. The villagers, however, had taken him in and cared for him with great kindness. Yuna had always stayed by his side. They had all been genuinely good people, the kind who could never ignore someone who was hurt. Sweet and kind-hearted, they had given him a second family. He wondered how he could ever forget them. Determined, he resolved that he would go to that island and bring everyone back, no matter what it took. As he stood there, he became aware of an unusual concentration of prana, sensing that the very space around him seemed to be distorting. He reminded himself that prana referred to the mental energy of living beings, an inner power that anyone could possess, though very few were aware of it. While most prana remained colorless and transparent, talented individuals could intentionally harness it, and in some cases, those with powerful prana could make it visible. It was even said that certain races possessed special forms of prana. From a distance, a man observed Lowe and identified him as the survivor of Babel. The man acknowledged that his priority had always been protection, but it seemed Lowe had escaped and survived on his own without understanding the circumstances around him. The man spoke, saying that if Lowe truly wanted to go to that island, then he should pick up the sword. He added that if he saw potential in Lowe, he would train him, but only if Lowe came at him with the intent to kill. Then he handed the sword to Lowe. The two began to fight and train together, preparing for the days ahead. The man recognized that, as expected, Lowe was a beginner, but the pressure he exerted and the waves of prana surrounding him were extraordinary. He began to believe that Lowe was the real deal. During their training, the man began sharing important information with Lowe. He explained that the place Lowe sought was called the Island of the Gods. Lowe sat on the ground, listening intently. The man described how the island typically floated on the vast sea, but, on rare occasions, appeared in entirely different locations, erasing both people and land in its wake. The man confessed that he had been working to prevent such events, but once again, he had been too late. He mentioned a theory that the humans enveloped in that mysterious light might have been transported to the Island of the Gods. Lowe then asked whether touching that light might take him there as well. The man replied that, as he had said, it was just a theory. Perhaps those people were still alive, but no one knew what might be happening to them. When Lowe asked what he should do now, the man explained that there was a direct approach. Through the adventurer ranking system, Lowe would have to rank within the top 10. Surprised by the mention of adventurer rankings, Lowe asked what that meant. The man clarified that adventurers were responsible for surviving and exploring uncharted territories. It was the ranking with the highest number of participants, and those who made it to the top ranks were considered monsters in terms of strength. If someone could make it into the top 10, they would earn the right to go to the Island of the Gods. He warned Lowe that the Island of the Gods had consistently been classified as the #1 danger zone, and almost no adventurer had ever returned alive. Despite this, he asked Lowe if he still wished to go. Lowe confirmed his resolve without hesitation. Accepting his determination, the man agreed to train him for a year. However, he clarified that all he could teach Lowe was the art of the sword. After that, Lowe would have to climb the adventurer rankings on his own, using his mentor merely as a stepping stone. The man then introduced himself, stating that his name was Adel, ranked #1 in that ranking, and known as the strongest knight of humanity. He then asked Lowe for his name. Lowe introduced himself simply as Lowe. They shook hands, and Adel warned him that he would not go easy on him, especially since Lowe had been the first person to cut him down with a single strike. And so began a hellish year. Blisters burst on Lowe's hands and feet, muscles tore, bones cracked, and blood poured from nearly every part of his body. Adel never spoke about the Island of the Gods again after that day, as if silently telling Lowe that he would have to discover everything else on his own, and if he couldn't, then he might as well give up. Despite the grueling training, Lowe held on to the belief that the villagers might still be alive. He had no choice but to keep believing. Every day, Adel trained him without rest or mercy. During those long days, Lowe often pondered the fate of the villagers and the true nature of the Island of the Gods. He vowed to climb the adventurer rankings to uncover the truth. 1 year later, Adel and Lowe stood once more on the edge of the same mountain and river, where Lowe had last seen his village before it vanished. Adel turned to him and asked if he was ready. Lowe replied that he had been ready for quite some time. He closed his eyes and recalled the moment when Yuna had told him of her dream to become an adventurer. She had asked him to come along with her on that journey. Returning to the present, Lowe thought of how Yuna, who had once longed for the outside world, was now gone, and how, against all odds, he had become the one to set out. For now he would hold on to Yuna's dream. Adel then gave the signal to depart, telling him, "Let's go, Lowe." Lowe responded with a firm yes. Adel looked at him and noted that he was now 17 years old and had grown much taller. Lowe remarked that it was his growth period, as the disciple of humanity's strongest knight. And with that, Lowe's adventure to the Island of the Gods began. At the Trachista branch of the appraisal bureau, Luke stirred awake at her desk. Someone nearby called her name, reminding her that it was almost time. She jolted up, muttering under her breath that she was in trouble for dozing off again. Rising quickly, she walked through the hallway alongside a colleague. The colleague glanced sideways at her and asked whether she had stayed up all night checking the rankings again. Luke confirmed without hesitation, remarking that she was an appraiser after all. Her colleague sighed, reminding her that being an appraiser meant she needed to take better care of her condition. Unlike those in desk jobs, she was responsible for determining the ranks of adventurers across the world. Appraisers were dispatched globally to assess rankers' skills and update the rankings accordingly. It was a highly demanding and prestigious role. Appraisers were expected to possess extensive expertise and unbiased judgment. Before they could judge others' merit, they themselves had to pass rigorous assessments, making it one of the strictest professions, reserved only for the most qualified. Luke admitted that although she was an appraiser, she still ranked low within the system. She added that if she wanted to do what she truly desired, she'd need to climb the internal ranks. When her colleague asked what exactly she wanted to do, Luke vaguely replied that there were a bunch of things. Her colleague pointed out that the fastest path to promotion for an appraiser was to become the exclusive appraiser of a skilled ranker. Luke agreed in theory but confessed that she couldn't find any ranker she actually liked. Her colleague teased that her standards were simply too high. Luke didn't deny it. In her view, most rankers these days were just plain dull. She reminisced that back in the day, the ranking competitions had been fiercer, and top spots in most categories were no longer so fixed. Now the stability of the rankings seemed to undermine the very purpose of having appraisers around. Rankings were supposed to reflect constant change and growth. Her colleague chuckled and called her a ranking maniac. Luke proudly accepted the label. As they walked downstairs together, Luke voiced her hopes aloud, wondering if there was a new star out there, promising figure who could shake up the rankings. Her colleague smiled and gestured toward a nearby door, suggesting that perhaps such a star was inside. As the door opened, they were met with the sight of a large group of men sitting in the hall. Luke stepped in and commented that it was the third time this year that the Adventurer Ranking Registration exam was being held, and that it seemed unusually crowded. Her colleague nodded and said it was likely due to Aspen Forest being added to the Danger Zone rankings 2 months prior. Luke agreed that it made sense and scanned the room. Her colleague pointed to a few individuals and began introducing them. One was Old Darkus, ranked 753 in the mercenary category and the leader of the Red Wolf Mercenary Corps, considered a top-notch Rocky fighter in the country. Another was Eddie Marksman, ranked 42 in the Archer category. The Marksman family had a rich legacy in archery. Eddie's father had once been ranked number 2, and his older brother currently held the 7th rank. Rumor had it that Eddie's arrow speed already reached double digits, making him a formidable talent for his age. Aside from them, there were a few others who appeared promising. Luke looked around and correctly guessed some of their ranks: a merchant ranker, a knight ranker, a sailor ranker, and even a guide ranker. Her colleague was impressed and asked how she could be so confident. Luke grinned, stating that as an appraiser, she could usually determine someone's ranking category just by observing them. Luke added that the adventurer ranking had become especially useful lately. Many people wanted to register under it because it was a requirement to enter dangerous places such as Aspen Forest. Just then, a bell rang, and her colleague excused herself to return to her desk. At that moment, a young man, Lowe, approached the front desk. She greeted him warmly. He asked if this was where one could register for the rankings. She confirmed that it was. The rankings were managed by the Appraisal Bureau, and appraisers dispatched throughout the land evaluated rankers' achievements and abilities to determine their ranks. She informed him that while updates to existing ranks could be done by any certified appraiser, initial registration had to be completed at an official bureau. Lowe stated that he wished to register for the adventurer ranking. She told him his timing was perfect, as the entrance exam was about to begin. She asked if he'd like to join. He nodded. She handed him a form to fill out and explained that the examination fee was 3,000 mel. After completing the paperwork and submitting the fee, she thanked him and directed him to a waiting room, letting him know that his candidate number was 53. Meanwhile, Luke had walked over and observed the exchange. She scoffed quietly, noting how some bumpkins still didn't know what the appraisal bureau even was. Her colleague chuckled and said it had been a while since she'd needed to explain the basics. She then asked Luke if she'd be willing to help grade the written portion of the exam. Luke agreed, saying that desk work wasn't so bad once in a while. Her colleague laughed and asked if Luke was mocking her, but Luke replied earnestly that she wasn't. Soon the exam began. The desk manager stood on stage and addressed the room full of hopeful candidates, announcing the commencement of the Adventurer Ranking Registration exam. She explained that the exam consisted of 3 parts: a written test, a practical test, and a final test, whose contents would only be revealed right before it began. She reassured the examinees that their overall score would determine their success. A poor performance in one section could be redeemed by strong scores in the others, so they were urged not to give up prematurely. The written test began. Candidates bent over their desks, muttering about how difficult the questions were and how vast the scope seemed. After a while, the time was called, and the manager informed them that the practical test would be held in 2 hours in the forest outside the village. They were instructed to wait until the results of the written test were ready, after which they would be guided to the forest. She then asked Luke to assist with grading. Luke agreed. As they worked through the tests, Luke eventually picked up a paper labeled with candidate number 53. She immediately recognized it as belonging to the boy who had come to the desk earlier, the one with the lifeless eyes. She glanced at his answers. One question asked candidates to name 3 routes to Yorsum Island. His answer: I do not know. Another question required identification of a demon's offspring based on its symbolic mark. He had scribbled something ambiguous: 2 or 3. All of them were wrong. Luke marked the answers with a grimace, thinking to herself how ridiculous the test was, and how frustrating it was for her to grade such papers created by some country bumpkin who probably didn't even understand what they were being tested on. 2 hours later, all of them arrived at the forest. The front desk manager explained that the practical test was a treasure hunt. The candidates were required to deliver the items listed on a provided form. They were told to refer to the point values listed on the right side of the form and aim for the items with higher scores, if they wished. However, the manager made it clear that fighting between participants was prohibited, and whoever touched an item first would have the right to claim it. One of the candidates expressed confidence in their knowledge of herbs, while another remarked that they were good at catching bugs. After that, the practical examination officially began, and all the candidates started running toward their chosen tasks. The front desk manager, observing the scene, commented that it was finally a break. Luke was also present there. The manager wondered silently how many candidates would pass the test. Luke replied that perhaps half of them might, since their movements made it evident that they were quite competent this time. The manager then asked Luke if anyone had caught his eye. Luke responded that, once again, no one had. Suddenly, one of the candidates approached. It was old Darkus, who claimed to be the first to finish. He handed over a Rigel War and earned 120 points. The manager reminded him that there were still some items left and asked if he intended to stop there. Ole confirmed that he did, stating that he had already passed. The manager informed him that he would start at a higher ranking once officially registered. Ole, however, remarked that it didn't matter to him, since his real job was that of a mercenary, and he didn't care about the adventurer rankings. Another candidate, Eddie, then arrived and stated that he had thought he was the first, only to find someone else already there. The desk manager identified the item he brought as a tail feather from a flock bird and awarded him 180 points. Eddie questioned whether that score was a bit too high, pointing out that flock birds were commonly eaten in his household. Old Darkus mocked him, saying he was bragging over what he called feathers. Eddie clarified that he wasn't bragging and explained that flock birds could fly silently at speeds of 500 mph, making them nearly invisible to the naked eye. Old Darkus, feigning surprise, admitted he hadn't known about those qualities and sarcastically suggested that, with all those tricks, perhaps a clown suit would suit Eddie better. Angered, Eddie asked if he wanted to test that. Ole replied affirmatively, and both of them began arguing and preparing to fight. The desk manager observed the tension and remarked that rankers really had a lot of pride. Luke responded that this pride was precisely what made them rankers. Suddenly, everyone was stunned when someone else appeared. It was Lowe, and he had brought with him the entire corpse of a red grizzly. Lowe explained that he didn't know how to extract the gallbladder, so he decided to bring the whole thing. The desk manager, visibly surprised, confirmed that this was acceptable and awarded 300 points for the red grizzly's gallbladder. All of the candidates standing nearby were astonished, wondering who this person was who had taken down a red grizzly solo. Luke looked at Lowe and noted that, despite having performed poorly on the written test, Lowe had correctly identified the red grizzly. Lowe responded that these beasts often showed up near his village, so he was familiar with how they looked. Curious, Luke asked about his village. Meanwhile, Luke overheard a conversation among some of the other candidates. One of them mentioned having seen the event unfold firsthand, but admitted that they couldn't describe it clearly. According to the candidate, Lowe had simply drawn his sword, and the next thing they knew, the red grizzly had already been sliced down. Luke was genuinely surprised upon hearing this. 1 hour later, in the underground training facility, an announcement came from the front desk manager. She addressed everyone and asked if they knew whom an adventurer must always be wary of. She answered her own question, stating that it would be both beasts and humans. Since an adventurer's mission is to explore new lands, they often venture into unpopulated areas. There they usually face threats from bandits or pirates. She explained that strength was essential to overcome such threats. Therefore, the final test would be a mock battle in which the candidates would compete against each other. She reassured them that the purpose was simply to gauge their abilities, so they shouldn't be too nervous. Winning or losing would not determine whether they passed. Eddie remarked that, had this information been disclosed earlier, some people might have tried to eliminate others during the practical test. He concluded that this was likely the reason it had been kept secret until now. Meanwhile, a sailor ranker approached Old Darkus and challenged him to a fight. He accused Ole of merely picking up a rock during the earlier test and claimed he had heard that the mercenary rankings were full of loud, third-rate thugs. He declared that he would crush Ole right then and there. Old Darkus turned around and, without hesitation, struck him hard with his sword, sending him sliding across the ground. He apologized, stating that he couldn't tolerate such an insult. The front desk manager, observing the situation, noted that since the challenger had already failed the previous course, they could pretend the incident hadn't occurred. She added that, even if he had been trying to make a comeback, it was a foolish attempt. Being third class in a major ranking, she thought, essentially meant being a monster. As she looked over the crowd, she began to wonder who would be a worthy opponent for Ole. She speculated silently that it might be Eddie. Just then, Luke approached the front desk manager. She greeted him and asked what was going on. Luke asked if he could choose the fighters for one of the matches. The desk manager, somewhat uncertain, said that he could. Luke then announced that for match number 8, candidates number 27 and number 41 would team up and fight against candidate number 53. Old Darkus reacted by saying that Luke must be out of his mind. Eddie added that it had been a while since he had been this underestimated. The desk manager, clearly surprised by the pairing, asked Luke if he was really okay with that decision. Luke confirmed that he was, and added that if his eyes were not mistaken, Lowe was a monster. The battle between Lowe and the duo, Ole and Eddie, commenced as the audience watched with bated breath. Both the manager and Luke appeared visibly excited, especially for this highly anticipated round. Old Darkus, the leader of the Red Wolf mercenary group, had already earned a name for himself the previous year by single-handedly eliminating the Kmor Mafia, an organization that ranked 67nd among criminal syndicates. It was widely believed that he had taken down 7 of the mafia's top executives, including their boss, entirely on his own. On the other hand stood Eddie Markman, the young heir of the prestigious Markman family of archers, trained rigorously from a young age by his father. Once the second highest-ranked archer, Eddie had been officially registered in the ranking system at just 5 years old. There wasn't an archer in the profession unfamiliar with Eddie's name, and many believed his skills were a true testament to his family's legacy. Now, the two formidable opponents faced an unfamiliar, unranked young man, Lowe. As the manager announced the beginning of the match, swords clashed at once. Candidates watching the match murmured in amazement, some confessing they couldn't even see the movements, only hear the sound of steel slicing through air. Ole, in the midst of combat, realized he wasn't facing an ordinary swordsman. The fineness and sheer pressure of Lowe's strikes made him wonder whether this man ranked among the top knights. Eddie too, though never having seen Lowe before, agreed with Ole's assessment. During the exchange, Lowe suddenly questioned the two, asking if they ranked in any categories beyond their current fields. Eddie answered that he held the 407th position in the archery ranking, while Ole mentioned he was 753rd among mercenaries. Lowe responded calmly, noting that if he could defeat both of them, it would certainly be enough to earn himself a 3-digit rank. Then, without warning, Lowe began emitting a visible aura. Ole paused to analyze it, deeply unsettled by the oppressive pressure that Lowe now radiated. Even Luke, watching from the sidelines, was shocked. He could see the aura with his naked eyes, something he hadn't expected. He muttered to himself that it was prana, pure energy, and an incredible amount of it. Eddie, preparing to shoot, mentioned that rankings weren't strictly about occupation alone. He said while he stood at 407 in archery, he also held a place in the sniper category, which measured shooting precision. Lowe cut him off, revealing that he ranked 78th in that category. The revelation stunned Ole, and the fight escalated. Lowe's prana surged as the battle climaxed. In a sudden flash he appeared before Ole, his sword now pressed to Ole's neck. Without hesitation, Ole declared his surrender, stating that he had work after this match and couldn't afford to be knocked out like Eddie, who had already collapsed. Ole, gasping for breath, admitted to himself that Lowe was a terrifying monster. He found himself wondering who this mysterious individual really was. Around them, the rest of the candidates stood in stunned silence. No one could believe that this unknown man had just defeated 2 ranked fighters, both of whom were 3-digit rankers. Luke, still in awe, decided that was enough. The manager formally declared candidate No. 53 Lowe as the winner. As the crowd murmured in amazement, Luke left the arena and went straight to the computer room. There she opened the appraiser exclusive database to investigate. She pulled up Lowe's information. Lowe Tooley, 17 years old, with no previous ranking experience. Despite possessing immense skills, he had never been documented. Luke thought it made sense if he had grown up in an extremely remote village. He wasn't affiliated with any criminal syndicate, nor was he part of any hidden sect. She leaned back in her chair, muttering that they had just discovered a jackpot. She had never seen talent this raw and hidden. Without wasting another second, she burst out of the computer room and shouted in front of the whole audience, declaring that she wanted Lowe Tooley to be her exclusive appraisee. The moment she said this, other candidates began protesting, clamoring for her attention. One begged her to choose him instead, claiming he would be a better fit. Another asked if she was serious, but Luke knew she had been too late. Ideally, one should investigate a candidate thoroughly before making an exclusive offer. Still, she couldn't let go of this opportunity. Lowe, still processing the outcome of the fight, was taken aback by her offer. He asked what an exclusive appraiser even was. Luke passionately explained that an exclusive appraiser is someone who dedicates themselves to a single ranker, regularly updating their rankings without the need to wait for official appraisal bureau dispatches. This service was especially appreciated by ranked adventurers who frequently traveled and didn't have time to wait for bureaucratic procedures. She handed him a device, the ranktel, short for ranking telegram, used only by exclusive appraisers. With this he could receive real-time ranking information and updates. She added that if he wished to raise his rank efficiently, hiring an exclusive appraiser like her was essential. Lowe, holding the device, paused for a moment and then replied that if efficient ranking was truly the goal, he had one condition. He turned toward the crowd and asked in a calm but powerful voice whether there was anyone present who could get him into the top 10 of the adventurer ranking. Upon hearing Lowe's condition, one of the onlookers responded in disbelief, saying that the top 10 of the adventurer ranking was filled with monsters. Another added that while Lowe's sportsmanship was admirable, that alone wasn't enough to reach such heights. Lowe didn't say a word and began walking away. Luke, not ready to let go, called out and hurried after him. She questioned him, asking why he was so determined to enter the top 10 of the adventurer ranking. He coldly replied that it was none of her business. Refusing to be brushed off, she declared that she would make it her business. She would become his exclusive appraiser and guide him to the top 10 herself. He told her he didn't want to put anyone in danger. Furious, she retorted that before being a kid she was an appraiser, and if age mattered, he was a kid too. Regardless, she had no intention of hiring just anyone. He said he didn't want to drag others into his mission. She grew serious and confessed that she had a mission of her own, something she had to accomplish even if it cost her life. and for that, she wanted to join hands with him. Lowe turned, silently thinking to himself that he would go to that island and bring everyone back. Then he finally responded, admitting that he too had something he absolutely needed to do. She introduced herself as Luke Ameldia, vowing to guide him toward becoming a top ranker. He introduced himself as Lowe Tuli, then extended his hand. The two of them shook hands. Luke then took him to a room, asking how it was. She explained that she had rented it for a few days so they could use it as their base for now. He thanked her, commenting that she had good skills. She replied humbly, saying it was nothing. He then remarked that he hadn't expected her to add a probation period under that kind of atmosphere. He recalled that he had said, "For now, let's try for a week." She apologized, saying she was just being cautious. Luke smiled and said she would prove how competent she was during that week, and that by the end of it, he would be the one begging her to become his exclusive appraiser. He replied that it would be nice if she didn't talk as if it were someone else's business. Luke noted that while he was an amazing fighter, in all other aspects, he seemed a bit spaced out. He admitted that he heard that a lot. She bet as much. Then she pointed toward the ranking telegram device and showed him the results. His new ranking appeared on screen. Lowe Tuli, Adventure ranking 27, 28th place. She congratulated him on passing the Adventurer ranking registration test, telling him it was amazing to start in the 2000s. He was underwhelmed and said he thought he'd place in the 3 digits. Luke asked why. He replied that both his opponents in the test were 3-digit rankers, one in the Archer ranking at 4 and the other in the Mercenary ranking at 753. Luke explained that the Adventurer ranking had more people compared to other rankings, so the competition was much fiercer. No matter how strong someone was, there was a limit to how they would place initially, and besides there were other rankings besides occupation-based ones. She pointed out that Lowe's sword speed ranking was already 58th, which was quite impressive. He seemed indifferent, simply asking if his two opponents had similar other rankings. Owl had a mercenary ranking of 753rd, a swordsman ranking of 521st, a special cleaning ranking of 209th and info 231st, and a reliable boss ranking 86th. Eddie Markman, on the other hand, had an archer ranking of 400, a sniper ranking of 78th, a reconnaissance ranking of 221th, and even a mushroom cultivation ranking of 19th. She explained that being part of multiple rankings would allow him to find more work. He replied that he wasn't looking for work. Luke said that even though they hadn't known each other for long, she felt like she understood him a little. She knew he wanted to get into the top 10 as quickly as possible, and she also guessed that his destination was the Island of Gods. He was startled and asked how she knew. Luke revealed that entering the Island of Gods was the only special privilege granted to those in the top 10 of the Adventurer ranking. She asked if he would tell her the reason after the probation period ended. He agreed. She responded that she would share her own circumstances at that time too. He nodded, saying that was fair. Luke noted that fairness was important, but her situation was complicated and not easily explained to someone who had just registered. What she was chasing, she said, was the darkness of the rankings. He was puzzled and asked what she meant, but she dismissed it with a, "Never mind." Then, shifting the topic, she asked him how he had become so strong. His performance during the match was not something one could learn overnight. Lowe answered that a year ago, he had become a disciple of a knight named Adol. Luke was stunned. She grabbed him by the collar and asked if he meant the Adol, the first-ranked knight. Lowe remembered how Adol had introduced himself, claiming to be the world's strongest knight. Lowe confirmed it, saying that even though he had been his disciple, it had only been for a year. Luke was speechless. Even a year under Adol was incredible. She pointed out that Adol was famous for never accepting disciples. If there were a ranking for rejecting students, he'd be ranked first in that too. There had long been rumors that Adol was searching for a successor worthy of inheriting his title. Many knights had desperately tried to raise their rankings just to gain his attention. Yet Lowe, without anyone knowing, had already inherited that title. If other knights heard about it, they would lose their minds. Lowe thought to himself that Adol was truly an amazing person. He remembered how Adol once said, "I am humanity's strongest knight." Luke agreed, he was the world's strongest. But Lowe then casually mentioned that he had actually beaten Adol in a sword fight, cutting him down in a single stroke. Luke stared at him in disbelief, calling him a liar and insisting that was impossible. She was exasperated that he could say something so outrageous while looking completely spaced out. She then muttered that she needed to check the database again, because even after reviewing all the ranking data, Lowe's name had only just appeared, and she started to wonder if that surname was an alias. Lowe found his thoughts drifting back to a moment from the past, when Adol had unexpectedly asked him what his surname was. The question had caught him completely off guard, and he had stared back, uncertain of what to say. It was then that Adol had realized that perhaps Lowe's confusion came from a cultural difference. With a thoughtful expression, Adol had advised him that if he wanted to take the shortest path to the Island of the Gods, he should begin introducing himself as Lowe Tuli. Although the risk would be high, Adol had said that if Lowe did things properly, important clues might come to him without having to search. Lowe had accepted the suggestion and promised he would do so. Returning to the present, when Luke had asked him whether Tuli was just an alias, he had calmly denied it. He had told her it wasn't an alias at all, that Tuli was his real surname, the name of the family he held most dear. Luke had nodded in understanding, thanked him for sharing, and remarked that they should call it a day. She had added that her work as an appraiser was finished for the time being. As she removed her hat, Lowe had been taken aback to see her long hair cascade down over her shoulders. It was only then that he had realized something he hadn't noticed until now. With clear surprise, he had asked if she was a woman. Luke, clearly irritated, had questioned whether he had only just realized that. When he had muttered an apology, she had shot him a sharp look and said that a simple sorry wasn't nearly enough to make up for such an oblivious remark. The next morning, Luke was sitting in the lounge, casually reading a newspaper. When she noticed Lowe descending the stairs, she greeted him, remarking that he was up early. Lowe responded awkwardly, initially claiming he was there to get some water. When she didn't seem to understand, he brushed it off and simply greeted her properly, wishing her a good morning. Luke returned the greeting and suggested they have breakfast together. As she began tying her hair and placing her cap on, she mentioned that their journey would be long, but today marked the first step. She proposed they have a proper strategy meeting over breakfast to aim for the top 10 of the adventurer ranking. While eating, Luke explained that in order to raise one's adventurer ranking, one needed to accumulate adventure achievements. She said land development and exploration were the basics, and those could be done voluntarily. However, she recommended taking on requests instead, as there were many who required the strength of adventurers for tasks like gathering or investigation. The benefit, she added, was that requests often came with rewards and were perfect for beginners. She informed him that requests could be received either from the Accreditation Bureau or, depending on the country, from a guild union. If she were around, she could handle all of it with a single device. Lowe, upon hearing this, asked what that device was called. Luke told him it was a rank tell, a very convenient tool. If she became his exclusive accreditation officer, she would be able to use it freely, though she mentioned she'd think more about that later. He asked if there were any requests that could easily boost his ranking, and the two of them began looking through the ranking device together. Luke told him that one simply had to accept high difficulty requests. She showed him how requests listed through the Accreditation Bureau often indicated how much they would impact one's ranking upon completion. Intrigued, Lowe suggested he would just take the request listed at the top. They looked at the topmost request, which was marked as Danger Zone Ranking 7. Retrieve the hidden dryer from the Rokiana underwater temple. Luke immediately dismissed the idea, stating that the task was completely impossible for him at his current level. Lowe, however, insisted that they wouldn't know unless they tried. Luke replied that she already knew, even without trying. She urged him to trust her eyes as an accreditation officer, emphasizing that the request was far too dangerous. Attempting it now would almost certainly get him killed before he raised his ranking. Still, Lowe was adamant. He pointed out that the Isle of Gods was ranked first in terms of danger and insisted that he couldn't afford to back down here. Luke stared at him, realizing he was far more stubborn than she had expected. She concluded she would have to find a way to persuade him. Just then, a man seated nearby, who had been listening to their conversation, spoke up. He remarked that it sounded like they had a problem. Recognizing him, Luke addressed him as Mr. Laud and noted that had been a while. When Lowe asked who the man was, Luke introduced him as Laud Broward, an exceptionally strong adventurer ranked 11th. Lowe was stunned to hear the number. His thoughts drifted to what Adel had once said, that most of the people in the top ranks across various categories were monsters in their own right, and here was one of them, Laud Broward, just one step away from being eligible to challenge the Isle of Gods. Luke seized the opportunity and turned to Laud with a request. She asked him to help her by beating Lowe up. Soon the three of them were standing in an empty practice ground. Laud, holding a weapon he'd borrowed, told Lowe that he hadn't expected him to accept the duel. Though the weapon felt a bit light, it would suffice. Lowe introduced himself as Lowe Tuli. Laud replied with a smile, asking if formal speech was uncomfortable for him and told him to speak casually. After all, manners were unnecessary in the adventurer ranking world. Turning to Luke, Laud praised her previous rank evaluations. He admired her passion and conviction, which according to him were qualities most other accreditation officers lacked. Because it was a request from Luke, he said he'd gladly help out, especially to teach their stubborn beginner a lesson. Luke noted aloud that Laud seemed to genuinely care about her. Meanwhile, Lowe observed Laud and could feel the man's strength just by looking at him. The moment Lowe prepared to charge, it felt as though he might be completely overwhelmed by Laud's spear. Luke cheered him on from the sidelines, urging him to take this rare chance to witness how vast and fierce the world truly was. Lowe, however, quietly told himself that he already knew the vastness of the world. Then the battle began. It was Lowe Tuli ranked 2728th in the adventurer ranking against Laud Broward ranked 11th. Luke called out for them to start the match. The two charged at each other with weapons drawn. Laud began analyzing Lowe's movements. He noted that Lowe was channeling prana into his sword and unleashing it with a slash. He also realized that Lowe was coating his hands and feet with prana to boost his agility. But what startled him most was the swordsmanship. It wasn't just skillful, it bore the unmistakable traits of the Sword Saint's direct lineage. That particular style was a secret sword art, traditionally passed down to only one disciple in a lifetime. It made no sense for a child to have inherited it. As he watched Lowe's fluid movements, Lowe scowled, wondering why the boy looked so spaced out while wielding such a sacred style. When Lowe suddenly counterattacked, Lowe narrowly avoided it and retorted that he was still quite relaxed. But internally Lowe was shaken. Just observing Lowe's prana output, he could tell that Lowe had more raw power than him. And then there was the shimmer, the strange quality of prana that couldn't be obtained later in life. Lowe demanded to know what tribe Lowe came from. Lowe, once again confused, asked what he meant by tribe. Lowe warned him that playing dumb wouldn't help anymore. That shimmer in his prana wasn't something one developed with time. He concluded that if Lowe wasn't going to talk, he'd find out himself. He added that Lowe could use arts too, right? Lowe remained confused. Lowe then invoked an ancient technique, reciting a poetic verse. The furiously galloping horse, passing many mountains, seeks its breath. Watching the water's surface ripple in newly bloomed sunlight, finding peace it turns its hooves and leaps with pride. He declared it as the art of the Broward tribe, spear arts or zen. And then, staring directly at Lowe, he warned that if Lowe didn't use his own art, he would die. As the clash between weapons echoed across the training ground, Lowe and Lowe remained fully immersed in the intensity of their duel. Sparks flew from every strike, and the force of their attacks rattled through the ground beneath their feet. Amidst the blur of movement, Lowe's voice cut through the noise, warning Lowe that such moves would be ineffective. He explained that no ordinary sword could stand up to technique he was using. Despite the warning, Lowe gathered every ounce of strength and attempted another strike, his expression filled with grim determination. Yet again his effort fell short. In that moment, a memory stirred in Lowe's mind, one from his days under Adol's guidance. He recalled how Adol had once observed that his prana control was still far too rough and unrefined, but reassured him that with time, he would learn to handle it properly. Once that control was achieved, the path to mastering techniques would gradually open. At the time, Lowe had asked Adol which techniques he meant. In response, Adol had told him to observe carefully and had then demonstrated one of the simplest, most fundamental techniques to begin with. Now Lowe drew on that teaching. He calmed his breath, focused deeply, and activated that very technique against Lowe. Lowe immediately sensed the shift in energy. His mind quickly registered the speed of the attack. It was astonishing, far too quick for the naked eye to follow. A supersonic slash, sudden and sharp, cut through the space between them with a brilliance that caught even him off guard. He silently acknowledged the move as highly impressive for someone so new to combat at this level. But even with that, he reminded himself that the wall separating Lowe from the top was still steep and unforgiving. He warned Lowe not to underestimate what it meant to be ranked as an adventurer. With a surge of power, Lowe released his own technique, his prana exploding outward in brilliant waves. The pressure in the air shifted violently, and in the next moment, Lowe was driven to the ground, utterly overwhelmed. The match was over. The difference between them had been made painfully clear. Lowe exhaled and approached Luke, asking her calmly whether she was satisfied now. She responded with a nod of appreciation, expressing that the lesson had likely reached Lowe by this point. Lowe paused for a beat, then asked if she had truly believed the boy could win. Luke offered a faint smile and admitted that she had only thought it might be possible, just enough to hold on to that small hope. Lowe gave a low chuckle, his tone mixed with amusement and insight. He remarked that it was probably because Lowe was Adol's disciple, wasn't it? Luke looked surprised by how quickly he had figured it out and asked whether it had been that obvious. Lowe replied that the moment he saw that supersonic slash he had recognized it. That technique, after all, belonged to the legendary Sword Saint style. It was a secret form of swordsmanship, passed down to only one successor per generation within a noble lineage of knight rankers. For a mere adventurer to wield such a technique was unheard of. From the perspective of those born and raised in the knight order, it would be seen not only as a betrayal, but as sacrilege, like having a sacred emblem stolen. While Lowe lay unconscious nearby, Luke's expression turned more solemn. She voiced her concern, saying that they would likely need to take precautions to prevent Lowe from crossing paths with any knight rankers. Lowe agreed without hesitation, warning her that in the worst-case scenario, Lowe could be killed. He added that if Lowe had been a knight ranker himself, the situation might be more manageable. Luke lowered her gaze slightly. She had already been thinking the same. Her mind drifted back to something Lowe had once said to her with unshakable conviction, that he absolutely had to do something important. She knew that it likely wasn't possible, at least not yet, but she hadn't placed her faith in him simply because he wielded the Sword Saint style. Her trust was rooted in something far deeper. She revealed to Lowe that the real reason she believed in Lowe was because she had once heard he managed to land a clean hit on Lowe's son. Lowe froze at her words, visibly startled. He questioned her again, trying to confirm whether he had heard her correctly. Luke nodded and repeated that Lowe had claimed to land a direct hit during a match with his son. She admitted that it sounded unbelievable, and even she had doubted it at first. But Lowe didn't strike her as the kind of person who would make something like that up. There had to be some explanation. Lowe grew thoughtful, his gaze distant as he tried to make sense of what she had said. The revelation that Lowe had used a sword technique had already taken him by surprise. But more than that, what had unsettled him deeply was the peculiar shimmer in Lowe's prana. It was not something that could simply be developed or learned later in life. It was innate, something rooted in blood or lineage. As he reflected on this, he quietly walked over to where his weapon lay on the ground and picked it up. Luke observed him closely and spoke again, her voice calm but firm. She told him that the boy probably had another technique, something he hadn't used yet. Lowe turned to look at her, his expression darkening slightly. With a slow nod, he admitted that if Lowe had used that hidden technique during their duel, he might very well have lost. On the other side, a beautiful girl named Yuna was standing in the kitchen, cooking something while murmuring a poem under her breath. Suddenly, the door was flung open by her grandmother, who asked what she was humming. The old woman scolded her, saying it was foolish, and reminded her that the poem was the reason they could not go outside. She sternly warned Yuna never let those words pass her lips again, making sure she understood. After delivering her harsh words, the grandmother left. Yuna stood there, deep in thought, and softly said that she was sorry to Lowe. Elsewhere, Lowe was lying on a bed, wounded from a recent duel. His body was completely wrapped in bandages. As he regained consciousness, he asked where he was. Luke, who was sitting beside him, responded by saying that he had finally woken up and that they were in the infirmary of the Recognition Bureau. Luke explained that Lowe had been asleep all day. Hearing that, Lowe expressed surprise, asking if it had truly been all day. Luke confirmed it and remarked that it was as if a switch had been flipped. The doctor had said Lowe appeared to be suffering from accumulated mental fatigue. Luke admitted not knowing what Lowe was carrying emotionally, but wondered if perhaps he was pushing himself too hard. Lowe quietly agreed, suggesting that perhaps Luke was right. With a serious tone, Luke bowed slightly and said there was something important to share. Luke asked if Lowe knew what incantations were. Lowe shook his head, admitting he did not. Luke explained that incantations were a special way of using prana, a technique that only certain races were capable of using. Many among the top rankers possessed this ability. Lowe then asked if Lowe was one of those individuals. Luke affirmed it, stating that Lowe belonged to the Blauwerd tribe, a combat-oriented race known for their hunting skills, residing in the southern marshlands. Luke explained that within the tribe, such techniques were often passed down orally in the form of poems, and hence were called incantations. There was a genetic element involved as well, making it difficult to acquire them later in life. Lowe reflected quietly, realizing that this was what incantations were. Luke continued, mentioning that Lowe might possess incantations too, and asked if Lowe had any idea about it. Lowe said he thought he did. Luke, encouraged by his response, remarked that incantations were an incredible asset for tankers. Luke expressed renewed confidence in Lowe's potential, insisting he could definitely become one of the top rankers. While speaking, Luke looked at a telegram and said there was a perfect quest for him. It was an investigation quest in the Azaban Forest, an ecological survey of a forest that had been designated a danger zone and ranked 48th just 2 months prior. Lowe asked if the task involved simply investigating animals and such. In response, Luke showed him a device and said that was only part of it. The real concern was that people had recently been going missing in the forest. One after another, adventurers who had taken the same quest had vanished without a trace. Initially, it had been adventurers ranked in the thousands, but more recently, even one ranked in the 800s had disappeared. Luke explained that if Lowe could uncover the cause of these disappearances, he could potentially reach adventurer rank 25. Based on Luke's estimation, Lowe could easily climb 200 ranks, although the risk would naturally be much higher. Lowe declared that he would take the quest. He also added that Luke must have introduced the quest to him because of believing in his capabilities. Luke nodded and confirmed that, yes, it was true. They agreed to proceed with the acceptance procedure immediately. Luke then warned Lowe that in the Azaban Forest, certain animals were prohibited from being hunted, and there were restricted areas. Although Luke believed it would be manageable since they would be going together, it was important that Lowe be cautious as well. Lowe inquired about the consequences of not following those rules. Luke explained that his adventurer ranking would drop. Luke emphasized that no matter how skilled someone was, if they recklessly harmed the ecosystem or repeatedly failed quests, their reputation would crumble. An adventurer's ranking, Luke said, was the foundation of their credibility. Lowe nodded in understanding. Luke then showed him a device screen and announced that the quest had been accepted. Luke turned to Lowe and said that this quest marked the beginning of a new chapter. It was the first step towards soaring up the adventurer rankings. Together, they would do their best. Filled with excitement, Lowe wholeheartedly agreed. Deep within the forest, 2 men were engaged in a fierce battle. A third man approached from behind and addressed one of them, stating that he could not pretend not to have seen what had already happened. He asked if the man had killed again. The fighter shrugged off the concern, replying that it didn't matter, as the Recognition Bureau would not even bother searching for low-ranked adventurers like the one he had just killed. He remarked that it felt foolish to genuinely attempt to climb the rankings through honest effort. Turning his gaze toward a cage, he pointed out the creature inside, a Unihosauros. He remarked that simply selling the creature's horn would catapult him into the 3-digit rankings in no time. An old man nearby commented that strength alone was not enough to rise in the adventurer rankings. He declared that his existence was dedicated to those who suffered under such unfairness. This man's name was Rosso Cruel, a smuggler ranked 7th. Meanwhile, another man stood staring at the cage, contemplating the potential. He declared that if he had to give up such a valuable hunting ground, he would surely break into the top 100. His name was Dalkin Iris, an adventurer ranked 670 soon.
Guard stops Lowe, demanding his card to check his ranking. He comes to know that he is the 2728th ranked adventurer, so he allows him to enter. When he enters, he agrees that these checkings are necessary, but he wonders how many people are in the adventurer ranking. Luke replies roughly 30,000. But she explains that only 20,000 are actively participating. She happily explains that it's a Hell's Cape incomparable to other rankings. The adventurer ranking is said to be on a whole different level, digit-wise. This makes Lowe curious about what a whole different level, digit-wise means. She explains that a ranker in the 4 digits in the adventurer ranking would correspond to a 3-digit rank in other rankings. That's how high the quality of the adventurer ranking is. Then, a 3-digit adventurer ranker is equivalent to a 2-digit ranker in other rankings. They are more skilled than the 2 he fought in the exam. Now, our protagonist understands that the bar is high, he needs to work hard. Luke looks at him and smiles. She moves forward with excitement and encourages Lowe, saying that the adventure begins. Inside Azaban Forest, Danger Zone ranking 48th, he stares blankly. This makes the girl wonder, so she asks what happened. He exclaims that this isn't an ordinary forest, and that something must be wrong. She becomes happy and appreciates his senses. She says that everyone said a skilled adventurer can tell how dangerous this land is at a glance, but ordinary people would have no way of knowing. That's why the Danger Zone ranking was created. Suddenly, she notices something and stops. She adds that the reason this forest was added to the Danger Zone ranking 2 months ago is simple. Unfortunately, something moves in the bushes. When our boy senses the danger, he grabs his sword tightly and sees a pack of different types of monsters heading toward him. Luke shouts, "That's a massive monster outbreak." She worriedly requests Lowe to protect her properly. RMC comforts her, saying, "Just leave it to me." He swings his sword smoothly and cuts down all the monsters instantly. This shocks Luke, who asks him, "That technique just now, did Adel teach you that?" He confirms it. He explains that he learned several techniques from Adel, but there are many he can't use yet. He thinks he might be able to use the second technique soon. This surprises her. All of a sudden, a big, broad, red orc danger level monster, rank 126th, appears in front of him and roars at him. Our protagonist decides to test his skill now. He unleashes his power named Mid-Dath and Lotus Flower and attacks the orc, but the attack doesn't harm it. They start running forward, with the orc chasing them. Lowe remarks, "That was a failure," which makes Luke shout in frustration. She questions what he is doing. He replies that he thought his technique would work, but it didn't. This makes Luke shout even more and remind him that he was the one who promised to protect her. Has he forgotten about it? Unfortunately, they arrive at the edge of a cliff. Our boy says, "We're jumping." This confuses her. Before she can say anything further, he takes her and jumps off the cliff. She shouts in shock. But he lands on a tree and then safely on the ground. Luke is shaken at that moment. She can't process what is happening. After a moment, she comes to her senses, becomes furious, and asks what he means by that. "If you were going to do that, just tell me beforehand," she yells. He apologizes and says, "Adel's training was mostly like this, so it just became a habit." She frowns and questions what kind of training he has even done. He notices something and says, "This place," but she cuts him off and, in a relaxing tone, remarks that they are so lucky. This is the survey target area. After Azaban Forest was designated a danger zone ranking, the ecosystem survey had to be redone. About 80% of the survey is complete, but 20% is still pending. She remarked that the remaining 20% is here. It's where the massive monster outbreak occurred. They look at different types of calm animals and plants. She notices him and mentions his name. He replies about the plants and animals. They are all things he has never seen before. He thinks that this is an adventure. He recalls Yuna and their moments, when she mentioned the word adventure. Both notice something, and Lowe starts to unsheath his sword, but Luke stops him. "This is a magical beast," she says. She moves toward the beast, and he asks if he's supposed to defeat it. She says, "Absolutely not." She checks its status and remarks that the royal horn is a beast that is an A rank, for rare species on the verge of extinction. She crouches and shows concern about the beast's wound. He questions if she can treat it. She replies that rankers often get injured, so she learned basic medicine. After all, she gave him some basic treatment when he was beaten by Lowe. She tells the beast, let's set up a base here for today. As an appraiser agent, she can't just leave this child behind. He understands the situation. But suddenly, she shouts at Lowe and says, for your information, protecting the royal horned beast is the same as conducting an ecological survey. Don't misunderstand, I'm not prioritizing it over you or anything. He replies, it's okay, I get it. At night, near the burning flames, both the beast and Luke are sleeping peacefully. But at a short distance, Lowe is standing there, practicing his techniques. He uses middle lotus and attacks the tree multiple times, but nothing happens. He sighs and says there's no use. Then he lies down on the ground and recalls past events. He thinks he was completely helpless. As he is now, he can't go to the island of gods. He must become stronger. In the morning, he opens his eyes and notices something. He gets up in a hurry to ask about the situation. She says, it suddenly started thrashing about. The beast growls furiously. Lowe remarks that it's gotten better. She says the beast has high recovery, so with the right treatment, it heals quickly. It's still a baby, so normally it would take well to people. This wariness. As he thought, that wound seems to have been inflicted by a human. He questions, a human. She tells him to come and look at the horn closely. It seems that parts are chipped away. It was attacked by a poacher, she says. This beast's horn is a panacea, so they were once captured in large numbers. That's the reason it ended up on the rare species ranking. Even if capturing them is banned, the demand doesn't disappear, they're still secretly hunted. In the underworld, it's traded under the name unicorn. Suddenly, the beast lunges toward her, but Lowe places his sword before it can attack her. This frightens the beast, and it runs away into the forest. She tries to stop it, but it doesn't stop. Lowe casually says, I've frightened it. She hurriedly replies, of course, even if it has recovered, it won't be in perfect condition. She starts putting on her shirt and says, until now, there was no information about this royal horned beast being in the forest. Chasing after it is the ecological survey itself. He also puts on his proper clothes and remarks that he'll go on ahead. She warns him to be careful, there might be poachers in the forest. He coldly questions, what should I do if I find a poacher? Does my ranking go up if I defeat them? She answers, it depends on the opponent's capabilities, but there's a possibility. He starts running fast and remarks that he'll defeat as many as he can. He thinks it's fast. I can't see it anymore. It came this way, but all of a sudden, someone shoots an arrow toward him, which he barely dodges. The man with a ponytail curses, damn this misfortune, dear, because they're in a bad mood right now. The fight continues. The man thinks about the color of prana. Suddenly, he asks Lowe to wait. This surprises him, and he hears a voice. He turns back and sees a small boy standing on a tree. Lowe asks about his identity. The yellow-haired boy shouts, name's Eddie, while the blue-haired man shouts, it's Owl. The day after the adventurer ranking registration exam, in a grand, lavish hall, the ponytailed man approached the reception and said that he wanted to take a commission. She replied that she understood and asked which ranking commission he would like. Suddenly, behind him, a yellow-haired boy approached and also demanded a commission. Both stared at each other silently. Afterwards, they stood in front of the window and continued staring at each other. Both called out to each other at the same time, and both insisted that the other speak first. The yellow-haired boy sighed and asked if he had looked into that swordsman who defeated them. The other replied in agreement. He said that he couldn't get any information, it was hard to believe, but it seemed that man hadn't belonged to any ranking until now. He was called a prodigy in the archery ranking, as he knew, but because of that man, his pride was cracked. To be so one-sidedly beaten by some nobody without a ranking, it was humiliating. The ponytailed man remained silent. Another figure approached him, called him captain, and showed his gratitude toward him. He asked about his adventure, and the man replied that he had registered. Another muscular man showed his pride in his captain, while another excitedly remarked that now they could expand their range of activities. A beautiful girl asked if their captain must have given the other examinees a hard time. Right, but the ponytailed captain disagreed. The muscular man and others showed their excitement. All of a sudden, the captain slammed his hand on the table. They stared at him in disbelief. The captain gritted his teeth in anger, and said that guy wasn't even looking at him, as if treating him like a mere stepping stone. He announced that starting tomorrow, they would triple the training amount. This revelation shocked everyone. A gorgeous girl said that if he had registered for the adventurer rankings, from now on they would be able to take on commissions they couldn't before. He replied, this isn't enough. This world is much wider than we thought. We'll train properly once more, too. His pride was cracked just the same. He had no intention of focusing on adventurer rankings, but they couldn't stay like this. The yellow-haired boy announced his ranking as 6,725th, while the ponytailed man had 6,301st. He remarked that Lowe, who defeated them, was ranked 2,728th. The yellow-haired boy said that with about a 4,000 difference between them, it was just a matter of time. Their interests aligned. Let's take a commission, he said. The yellow-haired boy mentioned, there's a forest that recently entered the danger zone rankings. The ponytailed man said, Azaban Forest, right, the more dangerous the land, the better it is for raising rankings. A day ago, when they were in the forest facing Lowe, they suddenly heard a noise. Lowe told them they would talk later and started running. The yellow-haired boy said that an injured royal horn beast had appeared, and he thought it was being chased by poachers. He might have wanted to protect that magical beast, right? The ponytailed man agreed and thought it was running quite fast. The boy said, when moving in the forest, it's good to use the ground's irregularities. Ran faster. Lowe followed his lead, moved faster, and approached him. The boy said, it's being attacked by a magical beast. In front of them was a giant purple monster grabbing a royal horn. They moved forward and attacked the monster. Our protagonist thought, he can't get close, then he'll send a slash. No, it'll get caught up in it. No, it'll get caught up in it. He questions, can he create an opening? The boy replies, how can he suddenly create an opening? The ponytailed man mentions the boy's name Eddie and orders him to aim at the monster's eyes, while he orders Lowe to keep running. They follow his command and do the same thing. They hit the monster's eyes, making it scream in pain and fall down. Both Lowe and the ponytailed man move toward it, and the ponytailed man orders him to aim for both legs. He does the same thing, making the monster scream harshly. Then he orders him to take the royal horn and escape immediately. Our MC does this, while the ponytailed man swings his sword and cuts down a tree, which falls on the monster and smashes it at that moment. Lowe stands there, holding the royal horn in his arms, silently watching the scene unfold. Eddie praises his sense of instruction. He replies that he has experience in handling his subordinates. Eddie asks about his subordinates' identity. Lowe silently watches them. He thinks that swordsmanship alone won't be enough to climb the adventurer ranking. He needs to learn things other than the sword. Luke approached and asked for forgiveness for being late. She looked at the two beasts sitting on a tree branch and was shocked. Eddie and the ponytail captain asked if they thought they were poachers. Lowe replied that it was just a misunderstanding, which was cleared up quickly. Luke agreed and said that suddenly attacking isn't good. She should reflect this in their ranking. This shocked both Eddie and the ponytail guy. She replied, it's a joke. You two would have stopped just in time. But next time, I'll really reflect it. They agreed and promised to be careful next time. The ponytail guy approached Lowe and whispered, why is he carrying around an exclusive recognizer? Lowe replied that they said it makes it easier to raise rankings. The guy replied, raising rankings is easy, but you get surveillance in return. There's no profession less flexible than recognizers just going back and forth to villages wastes entire days. That probably won't happen, Eddie said. No, he's being conveniently used. Eddie asked, do you know why recognizers want to become exclusive? Because that's how they can get promoted. Recognizers get promoted based on their record of updating rankings. In other words, someone like him, who dramatically climbs the rankings, is a perfect sucker. Eddie added, be careful. That woman is just trying to use him as a stepping stone for promotion. Lowe muttered about promotion and recalled past events. He thought, is promotion something I must do? It doesn't look that way. She said, so it means that the royal horn is safe. All of a sudden, the beast showed its gratitude by touching her, which shocked her. Lowe remarked that it looked like they had become friends. She replied, rather than becoming friends, it seems like this is the only safe place. The ponytail man remarked that the wolf was ungrateful, while Eddie said it wasn't cute at all. Luke said, it's scared because you guys are like that. Lowe justified himself, saying that he didn't do anything. While Luke carried the wolf-like beast in her arms, she remarked that Lowe had a scary atmosphere. He became confused while she explained that she had been curious since earlier. This magical beast, it's a forest fisher, after all. The ponytail guy said, it's a magical beast we've never seen before. Luke crouched beside the monster and explained, this magical beast is originally from colder regions, so that makes sense. Naturally, it's never been confirmed in the Azaban forest either. She told Lowe, let's record the existence of this magical beast too. Lowe agreed. Then she looked toward the two guys and said, Lowe and I have been in the forest on an ecological survey commission. What about the two of you? The ponytail man replied that they were also here for something similar. Eddie agreed, saying they received a commission from the Recognition Bureau. She thought, a commission, really? Was there a commission related to the Azaban forest recruiting mercenaries and archers? She realized that, influenced by Lowe, they took adventurer ranking commissions. She patted the wolf and remarked that Lowe should get his head straight too. She happily announced that she had good news. Your sword speed ranking has been updated. That Kenseru Ryu technique you used was incredibly fast. I applied, and it passed. She showed him his status and said that he moved from 58th to 26th position. Above this are mostly masters of quick draw. How about it? Are you happy? He replied that he was happy. But that technique would have been hard to see with the naked eye, yet she saw it well. It's intuition, she said. I'm a recognizer, after all, so I know that much. She asked, why, he replied, is Luke perhaps an amazing person? She giggled. She winked happily and asked, he's just realizing that now. Just then, the ponytail guy and the other boy stepped forward and asked, did his ranking go up? Eddie added that he was too curious. Luke asked if she could show them. He agreed. When they saw it, they became jealous of his high ranking. He said, I have something to tell all of you. Please teach me strength beyond the sword. Eddie asked, have you only done sword training until now? He confirmed. He said that Eddie's movements earlier were a big help. Eddie was flustered and replied, still, I didn't expect you to follow my movements right away. He demanded the ponytail guy's instructions too. The ponytail guy said, that's something that naturally became part of me due to my position. I'm the leader of a mercenary group, after all. I need to strategize to avoid losing subordinates. When fighting as a team, formation and order are important. Who positions where? Who will deliver the final blow? Calculating backward from that. He asked, are you really curious about this stuff? Your swordsmanship is incredibly strong, so you don't need my advice, right? RMC said, no, I need it. Tell me more about that. Both Eddie and the leader exchanged confused looks. Eddie said, when moving in the forest, first use all 5 senses. I'll tell you coordination tips, start with the front and rear. Luke thought, Lowe is trying to change too. It was good to have him fight Mr. Loud. She noticed the existence of poachers and multiple unidentified magical beasts. What is going on? She wondered. The current Azaban forest has too many unknown elements. This commission might be too much for us. Someone was watching them through a magic portal. A yellow-haired man asked about the situation. The giant, muscular, villainous-looking man laughed evilly and replied that while looking for the escaped unicorn, he found some men. The yellow-haired man said, kids are good. Their organs are fresh anyway, so they can get a high price. But the brown-haired man said, they won't be worth as much as a unicorn, but we should catch them while we're at it. When you step into a beast's territory, getting bitten is the natural order. Eddie said that using all 5 senses isn't easy. He added, sight and hearing of course, but smell and even taste all take training before they can be applied in a fight. Lowe understood this. For that, this forest was the perfect training ground. The smells of plants and animals were thick here. Loud, the ponytail guy, said he couldn't really tell them apart. Eddie said, a mercenary used to the reek of blood will have trouble. Right now, I can tell exactly how many animals are around us. He told Lowe to use his prana. Think of prana as a fluid kind of talent. Focus your awareness on the sense you want to sharpen, and you'll be able to pick it up. Lowe repeated his words. Mana started to release from his body. Eddie and Loud were stunned to see such an enormous amount of power. Lowe thought, I have to make every sense razor sharp. He used his power, which engulfed the whole forest in light. Far away, on a cliff, the bad man stood with confidence. His presence was sensed by Lowe, who immediately became alert. Luke noticed his strange behavior and asked about it. He told her that someone was watching them. All of a sudden, a punch appeared out of nowhere and hit his face hard, causing him to fall backward violently. Luke, Eddie, and Loud were shocked. He crashed into a tree hard while the bad man laughed and said, who the hell was leaking prana all over the place? This is disgusting. Thanks to you, it smashed right into me. Eddie and Loud demanded to know his identity. Luke noticed who he was and stopped both Eddie and Loud, telling them not to fight. She introduced him as Dalkin Iris, the adventurer ranked 672nd. This sent chills down their spines. They knew he was a 3-digit adventurer, much stronger than them. Dalkin was impressed that she knew him. She remarked, with my career I'm pretty famous. Just before I hit the 2-digit ranks, you committed a crime and tanked your rank like an idiot. At that moment, his companion arrived, panting heavily. He complained about Dalkin's speed, while Dalkin coldly said, you're too slow. The yellow-bearded man became happy to see a recognizer but didn't care who she was. She mentioned his name, Rosso Cruel, which surprised him. She called him a smuggler ranked 76th. Rosso laughed lightly. You're quite knowledgeable. You even know the crime rankings. The crime rankings were the hierarchy of criminals. They showed how severe a criminal's misdeeds were. Famous lists included the serial killer and theft rankings. The higher the rank, the deeper the addiction to crime. These rankings were unofficial in this world. Users created rankings outside the bureau. High-quality lists were sometimes bought by the bureau, as long as they weren't unethical. Once purchased, fans kept them updated. Dalkin noticed the wolf beast and remarked that he had been looking for it. Luke covered the beast behind herself and asked, "Why are you running around with that man?" He replied, "Obviously for money." She shouted back, "You joined hands with him just for cash. With your skill, you could earn it honestly." He replied coldly, "Don't jump to conclusions. Money isn't my only goal. I teamed up with him for 2 reasons: 1, to sell him goods, and 2, to buy goods from him." She became confused. With a devilish grin, he said, "You know what? If you want them badly enough, you can buy them." This made her furious. How could he dare insult rankings in front of a recognizer? Suddenly, Lowe attacked him, but to his shock, Dalkin stopped it mid-air. Eddie told Dalkin, "Our commission is to patrol the Azaban forest. We can't leave a dangerous person like you roaming free." This annoyed Dalkin. He unleashed his power and shattered Lowe's sword into pieces. He lunged toward Lowe and shouted, "Just die." Lowe was shocked, thinking, "Am I going to die?" But at the last moment, Lowe appeared and blocked the attack with his sword. Dalkin asked about his identity. Lowe replied, "That's my line." Both of them powered up with high mana. Luke asked about his health, and he confirmed that he was fine. "But more importantly," he said, "is this guy the poacher? I'd been looking for him." She agreed but still showed doubt. Lowe used his power Flash Blade and Gale and attacked Dalkin. Dalvin shouted back, "Is he using prana?" Lowe thought, "He's tough. My attacks aren't working." He remembered that his teacher, Adel, once told him to be careful when facing someone who could use prana. He was a special case. Normally, to acquire prana, one has to master something. It doesn't matter whether it's swords or weapons. People awaken hidden power only through deep, overwhelming study. That power is called prana, which means someone who uses prana is basically a master of something. Suddenly, Luke shouted, warning Lowe to be careful. Dalkin is ranked 12th in the boxing rankings. This made Lowe worry. She further explained, "He's 48th in the grip strength rankings, 19th in the grip power rankings, and 7th in the weightlifting rankings. His power is world class. You absolutely must not get close." He moved forward, spouting off personal info without permission. Recognizers are really annoying at times like this, he thought. Dalkin remarked, "I'll crush you first." He uprooted a tree and threw it at her. The tree was about to crush her, but Lowe stopped it at the last moment. He gritted his teeth and threw the tree aside, panting heavily. Raso was also shocked and remarked, "He's got some unusual prana." He told Dalkin, "Catch this one for me. I'm sure he'll fetch a high price." Dalkin smirked and showed his trust in him. Laughing like a devil, Dalkin said, "I'll capture him as planned, assuming he doesn't die first." Eddie, from above the tree, reminded him not to forget about them and shot an arrow toward Dalkin. Dalkin easily blocked the attack and said, "Is he even worth remembering?" Eddie was shocked by his words. But suddenly, a rock-like object was thrown by Lowe toward Dalkin, hitting him and causing a blast. Lowe ordered, "Now, this is the time to rush him." This made Dalkin furious. "Don't mess with me, I'll wipe you out," he shouted. He punched the ground with his power, causing a massive earthquake and the destruction of the area around them. When the dust settled, he realized they got away. Raso moved forward and remarked on the danger of his power. "What would you have done if you'd killed him?" he asked. Meanwhile, Lowe carried the wolf beast, while Lowe carried Luke on his back. With Eddie alongside them, they moved away. Lowe praised Eddie's intelligence. "You figured out his plan impressively," he said. Eddie replied, "He wasn't someone we could just rush and take down. I judged it was best for everyone to escape from there." Lowe thought about that man. How could someone that strong only be in the 600s? Suddenly, the wolf beast jumped out of his arms and started to roar at him. Luke said, "Now that we've made it here, it should be safe, right?" She told Lowe, "We've got one more thing to do." The green-haired man brought up the name Russo Cruel, asking if that was the bearded fellow he vaguely remembered. The girl beside him, wearing a yellow hat, confirmed his guess, saying he was right, it was indeed the man with the beard. Still confused, the green-haired man asked why they even needed to catch him. The girl hesitated in silence before answering softly that it was for her own personal goal. He was still trying to process her words when a voice called from behind. A man with gray-blue hair appeared alongside a boy, admitting that he had no idea what they had been discussing, but suggested they decide their next course of action. The girl in the yellow hat acknowledged that he was right. She adjusted her hat and apologized to Lowe, the green-haired man, saying she had let herself get carried away. Lowe, however, looked puzzled. The gray-haired man, wearing an irritated expression, reminded them of what he had said earlier. Their main mission was to patrol the Azavan forest. The boy with him confirmed she had told them that already. The man explained further that their plan was to keep monitoring the two targets. The yellow-hat girl stated bluntly, in the capacity of an official agent, that those two didn't stand a chance against them. The man acknowledged her point but stressed that was exactly why they wouldn't intervene directly. Instead, they would simply observe, and once the culprits revealed their crimes, they would report everything to the bureau and leave the rest in their hands. The yellow-hat girl remarked that it was still dangerous. He countered that this was precisely the reason they were handling it. Pointing toward the boy beside him and then at himself, he revealed that the two of them were ranked 6,000th among adventurers. If they managed to succeed in this mission, it could change everything. The boy with him seemed annoyed at being referred to as this guy. Frustrated, the yellow-hat girl rubbed her temples, commenting that he truly was something else. Given their guaranteed high scores in stealth and tracking, along with the fact that this forest was ranked 48th on the danger list, she admitted it would all depend on the reliability of their intel. If the information held true, she calculated he could climb at least 100 spots. The man smiled at the thought, and his companion seemed excited, saying he was now motivated. The yellow-hat girl cautioned them not to act recklessly. He reassured her, repeating that they wouldn't fight and that he had no intention of doing anything foolish. He then asked what the others planned to do. The girl in the yellow hat glanced at Lowe as if to answer, but Lowe cut in and declared that they intended to bring the royal horn to a safe place. The man agreed it was a good idea, noting that carrying the royal horn into battle would only make things harder. His eyes drifted toward the yellow-hat girl, who was gently patting the horn. The boy beside him reminded them that Dockland was after the pup, and keeping it close would only raise the risk of an ambush. Lowe scratched his head and sighed, clarifying that his concern wasn't about fighting, it was simply that he didn't want the royal horn dragged into danger anymore. The yellow-hat girl stroked the creature and commented that he must have been terrified because of everything that had happened. The gray-haired man concluded that they should split up for now. He pointed toward a tall purple tree in the distance, and instructed them to regroup there each night once the royal horn was safe. Either Nana or Eddie, he promised, would always be present. Lowe asked what purpose the meeting would serve. The man explained it would be a backup arrangement, in case they ended up needing each other's help. The boy accompanying him stepped forward and offered to show Lowe how to navigate the forest. Lowe thanked her for the offer. The man shouted after them that if they dawdled, Dockland might slip away. Without looking back, the boy told him to go on ahead, assuring him he would find him wherever he went. That only seemed to anger him more. He then turned to Lowe, telling him to listen carefully as he explained her movements. The man, unwilling to let his attention wander, asked if he could teach him more about her strategy. He reminded him that he had been in a hurry. He snapped at him to be quiet and pleaded for just a little more instruction before leaving. The two of them then dashed along the tree stems, leaping from one to the other. Lowe watched, remarking how much there was to learn. Afterward, the man approached Lowe and admitted that his sword had broken. He asked if Lowe could lend him his dagger, even if it wasn't much. Lowe unbuckled the hunting blade from his side and handed it over, asking if he would really be fine with such a weapon. The man accepted it without complaint. As he and the boy turned to leave, he advised Lowe to do image training before bed, explaining it would increase his chances of success. The boy added that he should review the exercises once a day. He waved at him, and Lowe waved back, thanking them both. The girl in the yellow hat then looked at Lowe with a smile, asking him to focus on getting the royal horn to safety. She reminded him they still had their ecological survey to complete. Though Dockland remained a concern, they still bore responsibility for finishing their assignment. Staring into Lowe's eyes, she asked if he understood what she meant. Lowe assured her he did. She stepped closer, pressing the question again. Lowe repeated that he was certain. He added that he had faith in Owl and Eddie. If it were up to them, they could pull it off. In truth, he admitted, they were more capable than he was. She agreed, saying there was something remarkable about their skills, and if he trusted them, then she could as well. Then she raised her finger with a sudden idea. She proposed that while conducting their survey, they also search for the royal horn's home. She explained that she had always wondered where he came from, and if more of his kind lived there, then perhaps it could be a safe place to leave him. Lowe asked how they could possibly find such a place. She crouched beside the royal horn, placed her hand gently on his head, and asked him directly where he wanted to go, affectionately calling him Sweetie. At first, the creature remained silent, but then he suddenly bolted in one direction. Amazed, the girl exclaimed that it seemed he had chosen the way himself. They both chased after him. Lowe asked if it could really be true. She urged him to trust the animal's instincts, insisting that royal horns were intelligent. Since he had been frightened before, and since he was still just a pup, it was only natural that he longed to return home. Lowe admitted that it made sense. While they ran, they spotted an unidentified beast at the base of a tree. The girl told Lowe to record it. He agreed, pulling out his sketchbook and quickly drawing its image, though he wondered if the creature truly looked the way he had depicted it. She soon pointed to another direction, shouting there was another one. Lowe acknowledged her with a quick, "Yeah." She turned sharply, scolding him that there was no need to answer every time. She then pointed again, spotting yet another creature. By nightfall, the moon shone brightly over the forest. They lit a fire beneath a tree, where the royal horn curled up to sleep. Lowe stood nearby, arms outstretched and eyes closed, as a faint green light radiated from his body. Someone called to him from behind. It was the girl, and he turned, addressing her by the name Luke. Luke asked if she had interrupted him. He told her no, that he had only been practicing what Eddie had taught him. He then asked if she was still awake. She pulled out the sketch he had made earlier and winked, saying she was reviewing his report. Glancing at the drawing, she teased him, pointing out that he wasn't much of an artist, and that it was something he should improve on. Still, she said she would give him a passing grade for now, though she advised him to keep his writing concise. She emphasized it was just her objective opinion. Lowe called her by name again and asked about her earlier words that she wanted to catch Russo for her own goal. He asked if that goal was the same one she had said she absolutely had to achieve. Luke admitted it was. Lowe then told her he would help her. She looked startled at his offer. Turning away, Lowe explained that sometimes, when he stayed awake at night, it felt like everything he was holding back inside might suddenly burst. Luke admitted she knew that feeling well. He turned slightly, saying he could relate to it completely. She raised her voice, demanding to know how he could say such things so casually, as if they weren't a big deal, and asked if that was why he stayed up so late. He answered yes. She thanked him, saying he didn't even know what her goal was. He told her it didn't matter, he would help regardless. She shouted that in that case, she would tell him the truth. Beneath the starry sky, she began her confession. Rankings, she explained, were lists that recorded the best people from the top down. Everyone competed desperately to climb higher, as gaining rank brought honor and proved their worth. But then she asked, what if the opposite existed? What if, in this world, there was a ranking that measured from the bottom up, a worse ranking? Lowe tensed as she declared that this dark side of rankings was what she sought to uncover. 5 years earlier, Luke had a close friend, a girl named Miriella, who had been blind since birth and knew nothing of the world's appearance. Because of her condition, she never mocked Luke's dream. One day, as they sat together on a bench beneath a tree, Miriella remarked that Luke was truly amazing and asked if she was aspiring to become an appraiser. Luke chuckled and admitted that it was indeed her dream. She wanted to become an appraiser who would one day surpass the top ranking and believed there was no greater honor than recording the deeds of those who had shaped history and those who would shape it in the future, all with her own hands. However, other children dismissed her ambition, saying it was impossible. Luke told Miriella that she was the only one who ever believed in her. In response, Miriella suggested perhaps their school was simply too small for someone like Luke. Then, almost shyly, Miriella mentioned that the previous evening her father had shared some news. Their family had been invited to a cruise ship called the Bond. Luke suddenly interrupted with excitement, asking if she meant Bond Solutions, the luxury cruise liner that had been built recently. Miriella smiled, uncertain if that was the exact name, but explained that her father had received the invitation from a relative, so she did not know many details. She then asked Luke, with quiet hesitation, if she would be willing to take her ticket instead. Luke, startled, demanded to know what she meant. Miriella answered softly that since she could not see anything anyway, she thought Luke would make better use of the opportunity. Overwhelmed, Luke stood up, shouted a firm refusal, and declared that if Miriella was going, then she would go with her. Miriella tried to protest, but Luke grabbed her hand and insisted that she would stay by her side the entire time. Miriella smiled, thanking her and promising to ask her father. Luke returned her smile brightly. In the end, Miriella's mother surrendered her ticket so that Luke could join. For Luke, who struggled to fit in at school because of her lofty dreams, Miriella was her only true friend. And for blind Miriella, the feeling was mutual. Her entire family was grateful to Luke. 2 days later, disaster struck. The ship suffered an engine failure, ran aground, and began sinking rapidly. More than half of the lifeboats were rendered unusable from the impact. The crew announced that if everyone were to be evacuated with the remaining boats, they would need to make 3 separate trips. The captain ordered that all passengers be gathered on deck, where he would determine who would board first. Placing his hand on a ledger, he admitted grimly that there was no choice but to use it. As the passengers assembled, the captain began reading aloud the names for the first lifeboat. One by one, the list was announced: Jack Brown, Layer Ames, Luke Imeldia, Lux's Nixon, Oliver Crow, and so forth. Luke froze in shock when her name was called. Holding tightly to Miriella's hand, she asked why only her was chosen. Miriella fell silent, then gently withdrew her hand. She told Luke she was fine and urged her to go without her. Luke tried to object, but Miriella silenced her, reminding her there was no time to argue. If they did not cooperate, no one would survive. Smiling, she told Luke that she believed she would one day become an appraiser, and she asked Luke to believe in her as well. Trembling, Luke finally agreed. The lifeboat reached the shore and immediately returned to the ship, but Miriella was not aboard. By the time the third trip was ready, it was already too late. Luke collapsed to her knees on the shore, overcome with despair, muttering that such a thing could not be real. Nearby, two men whispered to each other. One remarked that it was fortunate they had not been chosen, while the other added that it was the reward of living diligently. They commented that those in the worst ranking had simply been pushed aside. Luke's eyes widened as she demanded to know what they meant. Rising to her feet, she clenched her fists and pressed them for answers, declaring that their reactions made it clear this was not something people were supposed to know. She threatened to spread the words, "worst ranking," to everyone on the shore unless they explained. The men, clearly reluctant, finally agreed but asked her not to tell the captain. Now, seated beneath a tree beside a fire in the present day, Luke recalled that moment while speaking to Lowe. She explained that the worst ranking was a list that categorized humans in order of their lowest abilities: social, economic, physical, and mental. It was a ranking of those deemed to have fallen behind in every way. She explained that it served as a tool for identifying people to be discarded when circumstances became dire. Lowe realized aloud that it was used to decide who would be abandoned if survival required sacrifices. Luke, with sorrow in her eyes, added that those who held the power to decide lives, captains of luxury ships, hospital directors, politicians, often relied on it. Wrapping her arms around her knees, she confessed her goal: to erase the worst ranking list from existence. She swore never to forgive the system that had taken Miriella's life. Such a ranking, which plunged people into despair, had no place in the world. Lowe, after a moment of silence, said he now understood what the worst ranking was, but he still did not see how it related to Rousseau. Luke explained bluntly that her plan was to bring down one criminal by using another. The worst ranking was an unofficial list, much like Rousseau's place in an unregistered crime ranking. If they managed to capture Rousseau, they could use the opportunity to demand answers about unofficial rankings and perhaps get closer to uncovering the mastermind behind the worst ranking list. That, she declared, was why she had resolved to bring down Doclan, no matter the cost. When Lowe asked if she had any idea who was responsible, Luke admitted she had no clear answer. Still, given how deeply politicians and the wealthy seemed involved, she suspected it was a large organization, possibly even an underground version of the Institute. There was a long silence before Lowe finally spoke, telling Luke it must have been unbearably hard to carry all of this alone, that she must have suffered deeply, and yet she had never given up. He told her she was incredible. Luke lowered her head onto her knees and asked him to stop, saying if he continued, she would end up crying. Then, lifting her head again, she insisted it was not fair if she was the only one to shed tears. She demanded that he share his goal too. Lowe agreed, but warned that unlike her, he would not cry. Luke shook her head, declaring that she would make him cry right there in her arms. Luke was crying deeply, unable to contain the emotions flooding her heart. Lowe, watching her, gently asked if she was still crying. Through her tears, she admitted she had not realized what Lowe had gone through until now. Even if she cried the entire night, she said, the tears would not stop. At last, she understood why he had always been so restless. He had wanted desperately to reach the Island of Lords to make sure everyone was safe. Lowe responded softly that he had since learned impatience alone would not take him there, and he reminded her that she had been the one to teach him that lesson. He then added that if, in the future, he was ever lacking in something, she should let him know. Luke looked at him with confusion, wondering aloud what he meant. Lowe, with quiet determination, asked her to become his official exclusive recognizer this time. Luke wiped her tears, placed her hat back on her head, and extended her hand toward him. She promised she would not regret it, sealing their bond with a handshake. Together, they continued on their way, following after the royal horn. As they walked, Luke remarked that they had already gone quite a distance, and expressed her hope that the creature could truly find its way home. Lowe, thoughtful, asked what sort of places royal horns usually inhabited. Luke explained that most lived in caves. Because they possessed such strong vitality, they rarely needed to hunt, and instead lived quietly within those sheltered spaces. At that very moment, the royal horn let out a roar and bolted forward. The two hurried after it, and Luke, running, exclaimed that its home must be close by, urging Lowe not to lose sight of it. Lowe shouted back that he understood. Their chase came to a halt before a massive rock that blocked their path. Luke frowned, wondering if it was simply an unusually large stone. Circling around it, she muttered in disbelief, suspecting it could be a Muse mimic. Then, noticing the condition, she realized it was already dead. Relieved, she admitted that this discovery explained all the strange occurrences. Curious, Lowe asked her what she meant. Luke turned to him and asked if he knew what mimics were. She explained that they were magical beasts that lured humans with treasure and devoured them. Lowe pictured in his mind how such luring might work. Luke went on, saying Muse mimics were unique. Rather than using treasure, they concealed rare magical beasts inside their bodies to lure poachers. They lived in symbiosis with those beasts, and together devoured their prey. She added that such creatures were sometimes called moving museums, since they traveled widely, collecting magical beasts of all kinds. As she sat down beside the rock and ran her hand along its surface, she explained further that when Muse mimics hunted, they released all the beasts stored inside at once to overwhelm poachers. This time, however, it seemed the mimic itself had been counterattacked. Lowe, piecing it together, wondered aloud if Dockland might have been responsible. Luke concluded that their ecological survey was now complete. The outbreak of magical beasts in Azaban Forest had been caused by the death of this Muse mimic. Once it perished, the beasts it had kept inside spilled out, disrupting the balance of the ecosystem. She noted that the evidence should be more than sufficient for their report. Lowe, grimacing at the thought, remarked how horrific it was, and then asked if the visible wounds on the mimic's body had been inflicted by poachers. Luke shook her head, explaining that the injuries had likely been made post-mortem by other magical beasts feeding on it. Since Muse mimics formed strong bonds with their symbiotic beasts, it was likely one of the forest's native creatures had attacked the corpse. Meanwhile, the royal horn sniffed around the great rock and pressed its head against it. Lowe reached out and gently stroked the creature, whispering that it had lost its home too, and that he understood the feeling, like one's own heart being torn apart. Just then, Luke called out sharply from behind. When he turned, they both saw a massive red beast looming behind them. Luke recognized it immediately, saying it was the same creature they had spotted earlier. The beast growled, slammed its fist into the ground, and turned toward the rock, beginning to devour it. Lowe quickly lifted Luke, placing her behind the royal horn, and followed its movements. The beast growled once more, grabbed the rock, and tore into it. Luke cried out in shock, shouting that the creature was eating it. The royal horn, enraged, roared and dashed at the monster, biting into its leg. Luke screamed desperately for it to stop, but the beast seized the horn and hurled it violently to the ground. Bruised and covered in dust, the royal horn staggered back to its feet. Determined, Lowe stepped forward, telling them both to stay back, declaring he would defeat it himself. At that moment, he recalled Eddie's words. He had once asked him about a particular technique he had been struggling to master, one that always seemed to fail. When he admitted that he thought the problem lay in his inability to control prana, Eddie had nodded thoughtfully. He confessed that she did not know much about swordsmanship that relied on prana, but he could teach him the prana control method that had been passed down in her family of marksmen. She had assured him that with that guidance, he would be able to learn quickly. Hearing his voice in his mind again, Lowe's eyes lit up with renewed resolve. Lowe asked the girl if she was speaking about the prana control method. She confirmed and questioned whether he had at least a rough understanding of enhancing the 5 senses. She explained that the next step was to use those sharpened senses to look inside himself. Lowe wondered aloud what she meant by looking inside. The girl clarified that it was like observing from above, as though one were gazing down upon oneself from overhead. She encouraged him to try, promising he would see something fascinating. For someone like him, who overflowed with prana, she said it would be especially effective. Remembering her words, Lowe spread his arms wide, his sword clutched in one hand. A green light of prana began to radiate from his body. Closing his eyes, he declared that with his heightened senses, he would turn his gaze inward. In that moment, it felt as though his own eyes were watching himself from above. He realized he was indeed looking down at his own form, and he saw that the flow of his prana was disorganized and messy. He understood now what she meant, and with renewed clarity, he raised his sword and pointed it at the monster. The beast roared in fury and turned its attention toward them. Lowe braced himself, pressing the sword against his own abdomen, holding it tightly with both hands. Midway through his motion, he initiated the soft transformation technique. The monster let out a guttural groan. From the back, Luke shouted anxiously, asking if the second technique had finally worked. Lowe realized it had not. One strike alone was insufficient. He pressed forward and struck again. The technique of soft transformation was not about a single blow, but about building up slashes endlessly, with no defined limit. With this realization, Lowe attacked again and again, his blade carving into the beast repeatedly. Each strike landed, and the monster roared in agony under the relentless barrage. Finally, Lowe drew his sword back, cleared its blade, and slid it back into its sheath. Luke was left shocked by what she had just witnessed. Lowe turned toward the royal horn, who was sitting before him, and told the creature not to fear him, assuring it that he was not an enemy. He then extended his hand toward the beast. In response, the royal horn raised its paw and placed it in Lowe's hand. Luke smiled warmly at the sight of their bond forming. She thought to herself that, considering the dangers of the forest, it would be better to travel with the royal horn. Yet a part of her also wondered with worry if the owl's side was safe at this moment. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a man wearing a purple jacket was holding a pair of knives in his hands, standing in front of another royal horn. He ordered the beast to stay still, complaining that otherwise, he could not cut it properly. Turning to another man behind him who wore a green jacket, he asked whether it would be acceptable if the horn broke a little. The man in the green jacket shook his head, replying that the price would drop. The man in purple scoffed, and asked why that mattered, since he intended to grind it into powder anyway. The green jacket man explained that if the horn was presented as powder from the beginning, buyers would suspect it was fake. At a distance, a gray-haired man and the boy beside him observed the two. The man whispered that just watching such cruelty made him feel sick. The boy agreed but added that those opponents were far beyond their ability to defeat. The gray-haired man acknowledged this truth, saying their only choice was to report the matter to the Recognition Bureau. Not far from them, the man in the green jacket commented that it seemed they had gathered most of the merchandise already. The man in the red jacket, standing beside him, replied that in that case, it was time to deal with the spies who had been watching them, his gaze flicking toward the two hidden in the trees above. The gray-haired man and the boy were taken aback and immediately leapt down. They asked in disbelief when he had noticed them, as they had been concealing their presence. The man smirked and said he had known from the beginning. He explained that since they hunted magical beasts, they had become so attuned to their prey that they could sense the presence of all magical beasts in the area. The boy cursed him, calling him a bastard. But he knew the truth. Adventurers of the 3-digit rank were not nearly strong enough to deal with such people. The gray-haired man hurled a ball toward them, with an arrow tucked inside it. The man in the purple jacket mocked him, saying he had used the same trick twice. Smoke exploded outward, covering the area. The gray-haired man told the boy to run. He shouted back that they were already doing so. He warned him that bluffing an escape, as they had before, would no longer work, and asked what they should do. The boy suddenly stopped, plucked a leaf from the ground, and said they had no choice but to raise their chances of survival, even if only a little. With determination, he wrote something on the leaf, wrapped it around an arrow, and shot it high into the sky, declaring that he had done all she could. The man in red approached them, surprised at first that they had not run. Then he smiled darkly, saying their decision was clever, but ultimately meaningless, as he knew the terrain of this area completely. He threatened them, vowing to kill them in a single strike. The gray-haired man turned to the boy and asked him not to interfere with him. He retorted that it was his line. Drawing an arrow from his quiver, he declared that archers could only demonstrate their true skills when they had cover, and it would be a grave mistake to think his performance here would be anything like during the exam. The gray-haired man unsheathed his sword, remarking that it was quite a coincidence, since he too was very different from his exam self. Team battles were his specialty, and his skills shone brightest when supported by subordinates. The boy glared, insisting that she would never follow sloppy orders. The man smirked and replied that was for the best, before asking if they should begin. Holding his dagger firmly, he awaited her response. The boy nodded firmly in agreement. Lowe lifted his gaze to the sky, sensing something unusual in the air, and wondered if it was only his imagination. From behind, Luke called to him, asking what they should do with the royal horn from that point onward. Lowe replied that since matters had progressed this far, the best course would be to protect the creature. Luke suggested they take it to the Recognition Bureau, reminding him that this was not the first time she had protected a magical beast and assuring him that he could leave that task to her. Lowe, however, warned that their enemy would not remain quiet and insisted that to leave the forest safely with the royal horn, they had no choice but to defeat Dalcan. Luke admitted she supposed he was right. She explained to him that two possible methods came to her mind. The first was to wait for Owl to report to the Recognition Bureau and for reinforcements to arrive. But she pointed out that since their opponent was Dalcan, the situation was not so simple. If someone like Mr. Loud happened to be on standby, then aid would rush to them quickly, but otherwise it would take significant time for support to be organized. Lowe admitted that Dalcan handled prana far better than he did, and said he could no longer keep running from that reality. Luke then added that the second method was a far simpler one. Meanwhile, on the other side, Dalcan appeared surprised as he noticed the blue and red lights radiating from Owl and Eddie. He asked them if they too could wield prana. To be precise, it was not that they already could, but rather that they had just become capable. People generally awaken to prana by mastering a specific field, but without the right trigger, they remain dormant. Al had honed his skills through years of mercenary work, developing sharp instincts for team battles and calculating enemy strength. He had rarely struggled in recent years. Eddie, by contrast, was a genius archer born from a prestigious bloodline. His family's influence had been so overwhelming that no one dared to challenge him. Unfortunately, either of them had ever experienced defeat. Yet fortunately, they had both recently encountered an irregular prana user, Lowe. That alone had been enough to awaken their own powers. Al rushed at Dalkin with his dagger. Dalkin countered by throwing a punch, which Al narrowly attempted to dodge. From the treetops, Eddie marveled at the sight, wondering if this was the true power of prana. He realized he could now perceive it visually, noticing its colors for the first time. That realization made him believe he could shoot his arrows with far greater precision. He loosed a shot, only to see Dalkin dodge it easily. Eddie clenched his teeth in frustration as the arrow fell uselessly to the ground. At that moment, Dalkin spotted another arrow whistling toward him. He reached out, trying to catch it, but it pierced into his side instead. Shocked, he turned toward the direction it came from and spotted Eddie perched on a tree branch, already preparing another shot. Dalkin wondered if Eddie's aim could truly follow him wherever he moved, especially as the archer shifted positions high among the trees. At the same time, Al pressed in with his dagger, timing his attack to match. The coordination between archer and swordsman was relentless. When one revealed his position, the other pursued without hesitation, their accuracy in sync as if guided by silent signals. Dalkin quickly realized they were even using hand gestures to communicate. He thought that with time, he could unravel their rhythm, but he admitted inwardly that their bluffing was convincing. Scratching his head, he looked at Al, who was poised to strike again, and casually said he would quit. Al froze in confusion. Dalkin explained that magical beast trading involved many tiresome aspects, and to him, wasting stamina against them was not worth the effort. He declared that he had only been toying with them. Raising his hand, he unleashed a surge of purple light, his tone shifting into anger, as he asked whether they understood that this was not a gap they could bridge with mere tactics. Al, furious, shouted back that he should not underestimate them and charged once again. Eddie also fired another arrow in support. Dalkin braced himself to face them both head-on. He seized Al's dagger with astonishing speed. His grip was so powerful that he lifted it high into the air. He revealed, through his actions, that his grip strength was ranked 48th, while his raw grip power alone was ranked 19th. With a crushing squeeze, he shattered Al's dagger into fragments, then followed by driving a brutal punch into Al's abdomen. Al let out a pained groan and collapsed. From above, Eddie cried out in alarm, calling Al's name, and leapt down from the tree. But Dalkin's dominance did not end there. His weightlifting ability ranked 7th, and he used that power mercilessly. Al lay bruised and gasping on the ground, calling out to Eddie in broken words. Dalkin stood over him coldly, remarking that the man was barely clinging to life and that his organs were so ruined he would be useless even if sold. Raising his fist, he declared that it was best to finish him off quickly. But before the strike could land, something seized his arm from behind. Startled, Dalkin turned and demanded to know what it was. A new voice spoke from the scene, thanking the sender of the arrow message, because it had allowed him to arrive just in time. Al, still struggling, weakly asked the newcomer to relay something to Eddie. Dalkin glared at the man who had appeared and muttered in recognition that it was him again. The figure stood firm and replied that the final and simple method Luke had mentioned was none other than his own, defeating Dalkin himself. He unsheathed his sword. It was Lowe, and he stood ready to fight. Dalkin's face twisted with fury as he prepared to face him. The man in the green jacket stood before a line of cages holding captured magical beasts, muttering to himself that Dalkin was late. Stroking his long beard, he scoffed at the idea that Dalkin could possibly be struggling against mere children. Yet, he admitted to himself, if there was an unpredictable variable in this fight, it would be that boy. The prana flowing within him was far from ordinary. Meanwhile, Lowe and Dalkin faced one another, swords and fists ready for combat. Dalkin lunged first, throwing a series of heavy punches. Lowe blocked the strikes with his sword before leaping high above Dalkin's head. From the air, he attempted a counterattack, but Dalkin swiftly dodged, clicking his tongue in annoyance. He remarked that Lowe's movements had improved somewhat, though only slightly. Lowe looked confused at the remark. Dalkin then shifted his stance, pointing his fingers as purple light flared brighter around his body. He sneered that despite the boy's progress, he was still no match for him. With that, he sprang forward and kicked Lowe, sending him crashing to the ground with a groan, his sword clattering as he steadied himself. Without hesitation, Dalkin pressed forward, hammering punches toward him. Lowe dodged quickly, only for Dalkin to rip a tree from the ground with his bare hands. He mocked Lowe, asking what was wrong, before hurling the massive trunk at him. Lowe slid beneath it at the last moment, narrowly escaping the crushing weight. Dalkin, unrelenting, roared at him to die and charged once more. Lowe steadied himself and reminded his own mind of a critical fact. Dalkin's adventurer ranking was 672nd. He had faced opponents far stronger than this before. He remembered the warning not to underestimate adventurer rankings, as they could be misleading. As Dalkin's punches came close again, Lowe swung his sword through the air, releasing a blinding burst of green light. The sudden flare caught Dalkin off guard, leaving him momentarily shocked. Lowe then struck forward with his blade. Dalkin realized with surprise that this was a prana-based feint, accusing the boy of mimicking his own techniques. Lowe dismissed the claim, stating calmly that it was hardly even worthy of being called a technique. Infuriated, Dalkin demanded he stop spouting nonsense and lashed out with another punch, which Lowe narrowly avoided. As he moved, Lowe thought to himself that there was no need to face a stronger opponent head-on. He had to fight intelligently, just as he had moments earlier. He recalled Owl's words. Tactics were often misunderstood. They were not about pure creativity but depended on knowledge and memorized patterns. At their core, tactics were about securing a numerical advantage. Owl had once explained that there were simple patterns to achieve this. Lowe remembered the first, ambush attacks executed through teamwork. Pointing his sword at Dalkin, Lowe lunged forward to engage. The second principle was to draw the enemy into one's territory, keeping them off balance. Lowe struck again, forcing Dalkin to focus on him. The third and most decisive was a coordinated strike with a hidden unit. At that moment, Owl suddenly leapt from behind, catching Dalkin by surprise. Shock filled Dalkin's eyes as he wondered aloud how Owl could still be moving despite his injuries. He realized Lowe was pressing him harder than expected. Owl wrapped his arm tightly around Dalkin's neck from behind, strangling him, and shouted for Lowe to strike now. Dalkin cursed furiously and managed to hurl Owl away, but just as he regained balance, an arrow pierced into his eye. He howled in agony, stumbling back. From the treetops, Eddie called down to Lowe, urging him to finish it. Lowe, gripping his sword firmly, surged forward and swung with all his might, his blade cutting toward Dalkin in the decisive moment. Lowe's sword slashed across Dalkin, drawing blood and forcing a scream from his opponent. Yet, instead of collapsing, Dalkin suddenly leapt from the ground, leaving Lowe momentarily confused. Through gritted teeth, Dalkin demanded to know what Lowe took him for, his rage echoing in the air. Owl, lying battered on the ground, watched in shock as Dalkin launched a punch. Lowe reacted quickly, springing into the air to avoid the blow. Dalkin sneered, acknowledging that Lowe had dodged again, but declared this would be the end. Raising his fist once more, he swore he would crush Lowe the moment he landed. Looking up at Lowe, who was still suspended high in the air, Dalkin mockingly offered faint praise, saying it was impressive that such a small fry adventurer had lasted this long. But he added with scorn that this time Lowe had no comrades left to rely upon. His gaze swept over Owl, unconscious on the ground, and Eddie, who sat bruised and weakened nearby. Shouting furiously, Dalkin told Lowe to die quietly and prepared his decisive strike. Lowe, helpless in midair, could only brace himself until someone else entered the battlefield. At that moment, Lowe remembered the promise he had once made to the Royal Horn, assuring it that he was no enemy and that it need not be afraid. Luke suddenly arrived, her voice cutting through the tension as she shouted Dalkin's name. Dalkin stiffened at the sound, his attention shifting just as he prepared to throw his punch. Before he could fully comprehend what was happening, the Royal Horn lunged from behind and struck him. Dalkin's head snapped around in fury as he realized the beast had attacked him. Luke seized the opening, calling out to Lowe and urging him to finish Dalkin now. Still airborne, Lowe steadied his grip on his sword and descended rapidly. His blade struck in repeated slashes, each heavier than the last, forcing Dalkin to clench his teeth against the pain. The blows did not relent, and soon Lowe invoked a technique, chanting the name Lotus Blossom. A surge of blinding green light exploded from his weapon, hurling Dalkin violently to the ground while Lowe landed beside him, drained of strength. From behind, Luke cried out to him, her voice a mixture of worry and excitement. She asked if he was all right, then immediately answered her own question by pointing out that his wounds were terrible. Despite her concern, she could not contain her excitement, exclaiming that he had done something incredible. He had actually defeated Dalkin. Lowe, exhausted, turned his head slightly and corrected her. He explained that he had only knocked Dalkin down and that the man would not be moving for a while. But even as he spoke, Dalkin's hand crept forward, reaching for Lowe. He rasped threats, swearing he would kill him, repeating the vow 3 times as his voice dripped with murderous intent. His hand suddenly clamped over Lowe's face, lifting him high into the air. Lowe was caught completely off guard, shocked that Dalkin could still move at all. While he struggled in disbelief, Luke cried out, ordering Dalkin to release him. But Dalkin ignored her, clutching Lowe even more fiercely. Suddenly, Luke collapsed to the ground, her voice breaking as she tried to form the word monster. Dalken, displeased, muttered in frustration that he could not even manage to crush the brat's head properly, then let Lowe drop. Lowe, panting and bewildered, stared at him in confusion. His thoughts flashed back to his days of training, when Dalken had questioned his associates about how long they intended to rest. One of them had replied that there was no need to rush, while the other had pointed out that Dalken possessed overwhelming stamina. The first one said that, since they had been told to raise their rankings from that point onward, they needed to cooperate, and the other had added that he ought to take their pace into account as well. In the present, Dalken looked at Lowe with contempt, sneering that they were both pathetic. He grabbed Lowe by the neck, squeezing tightly as he vowed to strangle him to death right there. Lowe choked violently, coughing as he struggled to pry himself free. His thoughts screamed that he could not die, not in a place like this, not under these circumstances. He refused. As the pressure mounted, images flickered in his mind, Luke's smiling face, followed by the vision of another girl with long hair. At that instant, a surge of green energy erupted within his body. Dalken froze in disbelief, demanding to know what was happening as his grip held firm. Around Lowe, a vast circle of glowing green light expanded, illuminating the battlefield as he hung suspended in Dalken's hand, his entire being consumed by the awakening power. Dalken continued strangling Lowe in the air. In that suspended moment, Lowe's senses stretched outward, the gentle wind, the scattered clouds, the water flowing and the earth beneath, all feeding life. Within that scattered light, he thought he glimpsed eternity itself. Struggling, Lowe gripped Dalken's arm to free himself, declaring that an intruder like him must look straight ahead with his own eyes at those precious days that would never fall. With those words, Lowe swung his blade and severed Dalken's arm. A scream of agony tore from Dalken's throat as blood poured from the wound. Insult laced Dalken's voice as he demanded to know what Lowe had just done. Lowe replied that it was the Tuli tribe's secret art, a power meant to reach the heavens. Luke, watching from nearby, wondered in awe if what she had just seen was truly Lowe's hidden technique. His body radiated a green glow, unlike anything she had witnessed before. It was different, something beyond the usual prana techniques. Dalken, filled with rage, cursed her as a brat when Lowe cut off his other arm as well, leaving both severed. Lowe called out Dalken's name and, with another strike of his sword, declared that Dalken had lost. Dalken screamed again, blood spilling from his mouth as he scoffed that rankings were meaningless. His mind drifted back to years earlier when he stood before a man seated at a desk. The man had explained that if Dalken wished to climb higher in the adventurer rankings, he now required team results. 4 years ago, he had reached the rank of 5862, and the man asked whether since then he had undertaken every commission alone. When Dalken gave no answer, the man delivered the bureau's judgment. Dalken lacked teamwork. Furious, Dalken had hurled the books from the desk, shouting that such reasoning was ridiculous. He demanded to be judged by his results, insisting he was stronger than most two-digit rankers. But the man calmly told him that the evaluation standards could not be changed, and as a recognizer he could not promote Dalken to the two-digit ranks at that time. Dalken had leaned forward, his hands pressing on the table, and angrily asked what about the kid who had just reached second rank. Was he not a solo specialist as well? The man admitted that exceptions existed for certain rankers, but Dalken did not qualify. Rage burned in Dalken's chest. He thought bitterly that if it had been up to him, he would have killed that recognizer where he stood. Even if he had never shown it outwardly, he had tried his best. But for rankers the rankings were everything. To live as a ranker was to live for the climb. Some time after, a boy introduced himself as Ryu, ranked 4611, and beside him a girl introduced herself as male, ranked 5072. They greeted Dalken, and Ryu, brimming with enthusiasm, admitted he knew Dalken was desperate but said it was still an honor to team with the three-digit ranker. Dalken, however, had no choice in the matter. He had been forced into teamwork with those he considered minions. To him, teamwork was unnecessary. His skill alone was that good. Whoever he was paired with only slowed him down, and yet the recognizers overlooked this truth. Ryu and Mail had walked ahead of him one day when they encountered a griffin. Ryu apologized to Dalken, saying no one could have expected such a beast there. Dalken dispatched it with a single devastating punch, knocking it to the ground, and then barked at them to hurry and finish the commission. They agreed in unison. As night approached, the three of them lay beside a fire, trying to sleep. Dalken thought about how, ever since teaming with them, he had encountered numerous giant magical beasts. It was not that defeating them was difficult, but the frequency of such encounters was unusual. Opening his eyes, he noticed Ryu and Mail slipping away into the dark. Curious, He silently followed and soon found them crouched over a bag. Ryu called Male's attention to it, pointing out the abundance of valuable materials inside. Male smiled, delighted, saying this was the best outcome. Now she could treat herself again. Ryu winked at her and admitted that just as he had planned, they had obtained intel on giant magical beasts in advance, accidentally, running into them during the mission so that the unsuspecting Dalkin could do all the work for them. Male asked if he really believed Dalkin had not noticed. Ryu laughed, insisting there was no way he had. Some rankers, he said mockingly, knew only their rank numbers and nothing else. He suggested that they continue exploiting Dalkin for as long as they could. At that very moment, Dalkin stepped out of the shadows, towering over them. His voice thundered as he called them trash, asking whether he should toss away their bag or kill them outright, demanding that they choose. They tilted their heads slightly in confusion. Then, without warning, Ryu struck. He called Male's name and suddenly punched her in the face, leaving her bewildered and wounded. As she reeled in shock, Ryu sneered and accused Dalkin, asking what he had done to her. Dalkin's eyes widened in disbelief as he shouted at Ryu, calling him a jerk. But Ryu continued his performance, claiming perhaps they had been burdens, but to attack a teammate went too far. He argued this was precisely why Dalkin could not climb the adventurer rankings. Feigning outrage, Ryu hoisted Male by the arm, declaring that he would report the incident to the bureau. He boasted that his word would be more trustworthy than that of an uncooperative ranker. With a sickly sweet smile, he told Dalkin that if he apologized, they would be generous enough to forget the matter. He even asked Male for confirmation, and she, though still confused, agreed. Dalkin's thoughts burned. Was this what the bureau wanted, to force him to submit to trash like them just to climb the ranks? Never. There was no way he would bow to such filth. Without hesitation, he killed them both, leaving their bodies sprawled in a pool of blood. He felt no regret. Yet the bureau eventually discovered the crime. Killing a ranker was a grave offense, and though his past achievements spared him from prison, his ranking was revoked and he was banned from re-registration for 3 years. During that period, he turned recklessly to making money, squandering his life until the re-registration date arrived. It was then that a trafficker approached him with a strange proposal. The bearded man asked Dalkin if he wished to purchase a ranking. Perhaps it was vengeance that drove Dalkin, the desire to destroy the very system that had failed to value him, to make the recognizers regret. Now, lying broken in battle, Dalkin's nearly lifeless eyes fixed on Lowe. He called him a brat and thought bitterly that one day Lowe too would feel it, the crushing pain of hitting the ceiling as a ranker, with nowhere left to go. Lowe stood silently, staring back. The verdict was delivered. The victor was Lowe Tuli, adventurer rank 2728. Dalkin's body lay motionless on the ground while Lowe sheathed his sword and began walking away. Luke called out to him, asking where he was going. Lowe replied that it was not over yet, for he still had to catch Rosso. Luke remembered telling him that if they managed to capture Rosso and question him about the unofficial rankings, then perhaps they could trace the mastermind behind the distorted system. She rushed forward and embraced Lowe from behind, trying to stop him, insisting that now was not the time. In his current state, she explained, even she would be able to defeat him, so he had to wait for the next opportunity. Lowe tried to respond, but Luke interrupted, telling him it was enough for now that he had met a ranker willing to speak such words. Looking back at her, Lowe apologized softly before collapsing to the ground, and Luke called out his name in alarm. After the battle ended, Eddie, who had awakened first, hurried to report everything to the Recognition Bureau. Al, who regained consciousness shortly after, took responsibility for tending to the injured. Though he admitted he was wounded himself, he explained that if he wrapped his body in prana, he could still move, and that power alone was worth relying on. Meanwhile, Lowe remained unconscious and drifted into a long dream. In the dream, he saw his village. A green-haired man sat beside a woman on a bench. She was holding a small baby in her arms. The woman asked if it would really work, since the baby was only a year old. The man reassured her that it would, because the techniques were not engraved in the mind but in the heart. Through prana, when the boy awakened in the future, he would gradually recall it all. Perhaps, the man added, the child might even remember this very conversation. The woman cautioned him not to say anything strange, but Lowe, still in her arms as a baby, gazed at the man. Placing a hand gently on the child's head, the man explained that their ancestors once possessed special powers. Because of that, they drew anger upon themselves, were defeated, and scattered. One of those scattered groups became the Tuli village. Though they had lived hidden lives, the man thought it was for the best, because it allowed them to spend their days far removed from conflict. In his dream, Lowe stood before his parents and responded to his father, saying that he agreed. But he questioned why, If that were truly the case, his father had taught him the technique. Why had his mother, his grandmother, and all the others also done the same, and if they knew all along that a time would come when he would have to fight? When Lowe finally opened his eyes in reality, he found Luke and the recognizer standing nearby. The recognizer remarked that he was waking up. Covered in bandages across many parts of his body, Lowe stirred weakly as Luke cried in relief, saying she had been deeply worried since he had not awakened for an entire day. He thanked her for treating him, then turned toward the recognizer and asked why Mr. Lowe was present. Mr. Lowe explained that he had come while Lowe was unconscious and had even considered taking him to the capital if he did not wake. Offering him a hand, Mr. Lowe acknowledged the troubling events of his first mission and asked whether he could move. Lowe assured him that he could and pushed himself up to stand. Not far away, Owl and Eddie stood together. Owl asked whether Eddie had truly gone all the way to the bureau only to return deliberately. Eddie admitted that he was worried about leaving everyone behind. Seeing them, Lowe realized with relief that all his companions were safe. Meanwhile, Mr. Loud approached Dalcan, who was restrained against a tree and heavily bandaged. Loud asked if he could move as well, then knelt down and said he would release the restraints but warned against resisting, as it would be pointless. Dalcan rose to his feet and was taken away by staff members. Observing from behind, Loud's eyes lingered on Dalcan's arms, wondering what had happened to him. They had not been severed, but rather seemed to have vanished, a phenomenon he had never seen before. Something had been capable of striking the first-ranked knight, a deeply unsettling thought. As the group traveled together, Luke advised Lowe that once his wounds healed, he should register for a wider variety of rankings. Doing so, she explained, would help with self-analysis. For example, Dalcan excelled in close combat because he was confident in direct fights, knowing his physical strength outmatched nearly anyone. Lowe asked if she meant that registering for various rankings would help him discover his strengths. Smiling, Luke confirmed, saying comparative evaluations were essential. She then promised that when they reached the capital, she would personally guide him through the Bureau's facilities, where many abilities could be measured. He could look forward to it. Elsewhere, deep within the jungle, the bearded man wandered, reflecting on the prana fluctuations he had sensed at the end of the battle. His suspicions lingered on that boy. For something hidden for so long, the boy had revealed himself almost naturally. The man considered whether he was deliberately drawing attention to establish contact with the island of gods. Soon he arrived at a massive gate adorned with carvings of snakes. It opened before him, and he stepped inside. A cloaked man in blue greeted him, saying they had been waiting and addressing him as their leader. The bearded man advanced toward a table, around which cloaked figures stood. At its head sat a great chair, which he claimed as his seat. Addressing his comrades, he declared that they had finally discovered a descendant of Babel, a revelation that could greatly advance their plans. Now was the time, he said, to liberate the world from control by false constructs such as rankings. He urged them to demonstrate their full power. The cloaked followers raised their voices, pledging themselves in the name of Ouroboros. Their leader revealed himself as Raso Cruel, bearer of multiple notorious titles, 76th in smuggling, 76th in trafficking, 1st in smuggling, 2nd in murder, 4th in theft, 1st in drug manufacturing, and even a prana scholar. Above all, he was recognized as the leader of the #1 criminal organization, Ouroboros. They finally arrived at the city. Luke chanted the announcement with energy, halting before the great gate. She instructed Owl and Eddie to head directly to the treatment room while she herself would handle the commission report. Turning to Mr. Loud, she asked him to take charge of Dalcan's transfer, telling him simply to report it as a violation of ranker regulations. Lowe, watching her giving out instructions so smoothly, remarked that she seemed to be issuing orders left and right. Luke only smiled, replying that she was used to it, as cleaning up after rankers was also part of a recognizer's duties. Before they parted, she pointed at Eddie, Owl, and Lowe, excluding Mr. Loud, and told them to keep their schedules free in 10 days' time, as she would be updating their rankings then. Owl responded with a satisfied smile, saying it was about time, while Eddie confidently added that he expected good results. Together, they all entered through the gates. As they walked, Luke pulled Lowe aside and told him there was something she wanted to say about Royal Horn. She explained that when the Recognition Bureau protected a magical beast, someone always needed to act as guardian, and if possible, she wanted Lowe to take on the role. Lowe said he did not mind, but questioned why she herself could not do it. Luke explained that recognizers faced various inconveniences. When royal horns grew, they became far too large for the Bureau's facilities. If she personally became the guardian, her own feelings might get in the way, and she would struggle to take the creature outside. On the other hand, as an adventurer, Lowe would be free to do so, and for the sake of Royal Horn, this arrangement seemed best. Lowe agreed, saying he would do it. Luke stroked the beast gently as she sat beside it. Then she looked at Lowe and asked if he would give the little one a name. He thought for a moment before deciding on Ralph. Luke smiled, praising it as a good name, and asked whether there was any meaning behind it. Lowe explained that when he was young, there had been a man in the village who had faced a red grizzly all on his own. The man had been brave, and so he decided to borrow his name. Lowe patted the horn's head, thanked it for saving him during the battle with Dalcan, and asked Ralph to take care of him from then on. Thus, Ralph came under the Recognition Bureau's protection, though Lowe could visit any time simply by applying. When Lowe went to the treatment room, he found Owl and Eddie already resting in their beds. Eddie confidently predicted that his rank would rise by about 3,000 places this time, to which Owl replied that meant he would climb over 4,000 ranks himself. Lowe quietly wondered about the meaning of such leaps in rank. The two boys kept debating, throwing numbers back and forth, 5,000, 6,000, and even spoke of entering the coveted 3-digit territory. Eddie joked that if Owl managed 3 digits, he himself would reach 2 digits, and they bickered, telling each other to know their place. Lowe only smiled at their enthusiasm, realizing he felt a bit excited as well, and thought that perhaps this was what it meant to feel like a ranker. Suddenly, a voice interrupted, asking Eddie and Owl to keep quiet in the hospital. It was a green-haired doctor. She introduced herself as Clara Save, ranked 14th among doctors and an exclusive member of the Recognition Bureau. Clara declared that if she took charge, she could heal any injury in just 10 days, but only if her patients followed her instructions. She flicked Lowe on the forehead with her finger and told him to lie down as well. After examining him, she remarked that his internal organs were a mess, yet he had been moving around unprotected. She scolded all of them, saying adventurer rankers were nothing but fools. Lowe obediently took a bed between Eddie and Owl. Eddie turned to him and declared he would not lose. Owl quickly retorted that they had simply started late, and they would soon catch up. Their bickering was interrupted by Clara's sharp shout to stay quiet. A pink glow radiated from her as their bandages began to move as if alive, wrapping tightly around them. The 3 boys were shocked, wondering whether this too was the power of prana. Before they could ask, Clara had completely swathed them in bandages from head to toe and forced them to lie back down. Her skill, however, was reliable. Their injuries were healed almost instantly. During those days, Luke visited them several times, though she always looked busy. Her workload seemed endless, for the work of a recognizer was known to be both strict and fair. On one such visit, a girl approached Luke from behind and praised her, saying she was working hard and that this evaluation seemed to be taking quite some time. Luke admitted that there were many difficult judgments involved. She then asked the girl to contact a prana scholar named Layla, preferably one within the top 50. The girl agreed to search for one. Afterward, Luke returned to her computer, but no matter how much she looked, she could not find any information about a tribe called Tali. The mysterious technique continued to trouble her. 10 days later, they all gathered again. Luke stood before them and explained that this was the evaluation room. When updating complex rankings like adventurers, they rented the space and compiled massive amounts of data. She explained that to update rankings, they had to cross-reference with countless other categories. Hearing this, Lowe asked how many people worked on it. Luke calmly replied that she handled it alone. Both Lowe and Owl were surprised. She clarified that while she occasionally borrowed small favors from her friends, doing it herself made the process slower, but also more accurate. Adventurer rankings, she explained, required far more preparation than simpler ones, such as mercenary rankings. To handle updates for 3 people alone spoke of her remarkable competence. Lowe felt guilty, telling her that he had caused her trouble. Luke only smiled and winked, assuring him that this was her job, and among recognizers, there were some who could finish this level of work in just half a day. Then she shifted their attention, saying it was time to proceed with the main task, updating their adventurer rankings. She sat in a chair, papers in hand, and began. Owl Darkus, whose current adventurer ranking was 6,301st, had cornered Dalcan Iris, a ranker regulation violator, during the Azaban patrol duty. His wit, strategy, and ability to improvise leadership were all commendable. Taking these achievements into account, his new adventurer ranking rose to 2,097th. Owl's eyes widened as his rank climbed from 6,301st to 2,097th in one jump. Next came Eddie Marksman. Ranked 6,752nd, he too had distinguished himself during the Azaban patrol duty. He displayed unshakable focus, the ability to hit his targets in any situation, and a deep understanding of prana that he could even teach to others. His instincts in forest environments were particularly suited to adventurers. Factoring all of this, Eddie's rank rose to 1,873rd. From 6,752nd to 1,873rd, an incredible leap. Finally, it was Lowe's turn. With a current rank of 2,728th, he had discovered 7 unidentified magical beast species during the Azaban Forest Survey, uncovered the cause of the mass outbreak, and displayed swordsmanship on par with Dalcan himself. Beyond that, he showed remarkable potential to absorb new techniques, not to mention the mysterious power he had displayed. Taking all these into account, his new adventurer ranking was updated to 1089th. From 2728th to 1089th, Lowe had reached the verge of the 3-digit wall in a single leap. Luke smiled and told him this was extraordinary progress. She explained that the true moment rankers gained attention was not when they first registered, but when their rankings were updated. The pace of their updates revealed their growth rate. While both Owl and Eddie's jumps from the 6,000s into the 2,000s were impressive, rankings became harder to climb the higher one went. Lowe's leap from the 2000s to nearly the 3-digit wall in one go was revolutionary. From now on, she said, people across the world would know the name Lowe. He should prepare himself, for the changes he would face as a ranker would come in both good ways and bad. Thus concluded the Knight ranking update. Elsewhere, a woman addressed the crowd, praising the Maasai's Knight Order for producing young knights of such remarkable growth. She then asked to borrow the rank tell to check a particular ranking. She was a short-haired girl in a white dress. Another girl, this one with white hair and a sword, handed it to her, asking whether she was talking about the adventurer rankings. The first girl replied that she was. The second recalled hearing that very morning of a ranker who had leapt to the 3-digit wall in a single update. At those words, the white-haired girl clenched the rank tell tightly, grinding her teeth. She thought bitterly to herself that his rank had risen even though he had stolen Kenseryu. Her grip unconsciously tightened until the device shattered in her hands. The other girl was startled, but the white-haired one apologized calmly, explaining that she had simply applied too much strength without realizing it.